Bonjour, my name's Dylan and welcome to our French course. This is the Introduction to French, French Level 1, and I'm really excited to be with you to teach you all about the French language. The main goal for this course is to learn how to introduce yourself to someone in French. So that way when you're traveling or at a job interview or meeting new friends abroad, you can introduce yourself in French. And that's the most basic first step to learning a new language, is to be able to introduce yourself. I'll also provide a really good foundation for you to build on future learning when you take other French courses. So we'll really focus on how to build simple sentences and how to use French vocabulary and how to talk about things in the present tense. If you decide to take my Level 2 course, I'll talk more about how to talk in the future and a little bit about how to talk in the past as well. I would also like to invite you to join our online French learning community. One of the unique things about taking this course is that there's already a community of French learners established through Facebook. I've set up a Facebook group for all of our students so that they can communicate with each other. I'll post exercises and activities from time to time. I'll also post lots of information about the French-speaking world, whether it's articles or music or whatnot, to really keep your interest. So I really would like to invite you to join that community now. There's some more information in the supplemental resources section of this lecture. So just to give you a brief overview of this course, first we'll talk about basic French sounds and the alphabet, and then we'll move into introducing yourself using key phrases. And then from there, we'll start talking about how to use main verbs. And then from there, we'll talk about a bit more complex sentences that are still on the basic level. So that's what you can expect to learn from this course. Another thing that you'll also find in each unit of this course is there are a couple of different practice exercises, and I really encourage you to take advantage of those because that's really where you're going to be able to practice your French, as well also in the learning community on Facebook, but definitely here I really encourage you to take those practice exercises. This course you can work at, this course is designed so that you can work through it at your own pace. So really take your time if you want to, or if you really need to learn French quickly, go through it as quickly as you need to. So it's really up to you to progress at your own pace, but I'm definitely here to answer any questions if you have them. So I really look forward to working with you, and I can't wait to get to know you. Au revoir. Bonjour. In this lesson, we're going to talk about how to pronounce basic French sounds. All of the sounds you will hear in this video are generally easy for English speakers to pronounce because they're pretty similar to the sounds we have in English. In this video, I also use symbols taken from the International Phonetic Alphabet, or IPA. These symbols are also what you would find in a dictionary, so that's why I decided to use them. You don't really need to memorize them or learn them off by heart, but it's just supposed to help you in case you have to look these words up later on in a dictionary. And I'm going to use these throughout other videos which talk about French pronunciation. I will also provide French and English examples throughout the video. And also throughout the video, I'd really like for you to repeat the sounds after me so that you can practice, because this will really help later when you want to master your French pronunciation. So let's get started. The first sound is B. The B makes a B sound in French, just like in English. And in English we can say bat or beard, whereas in French we can say bat or barbe. The D makes a D sound, like in the English words dangerous or command, and in the French words dangereux et commandement. The F and the PH make a F sound in both languages. English speakers will say fact, efficient, philosophy, whereas in French we'll say fait, efficace, et philosophie. G makes a G sound in French when it's followed by A, O, U, or if a consonant comes afterwards. For example, we have government and vague, and in French they have gouvernement et vague. The G after an I and an E will be discussed in another video because it makes a different sound. The C, K, and Q sounds in French all make a K sound, especially if the C comes before an A, O, or U. The QU sound always sounds like a K. Note that in French, the QU is always a K sound, whereas in English, QU makes a Qu sound. So in English, we have calm and sac, whereas in French, they have calme, sac, et querelle. The L sounds just like English. The L sounds just like English. For instance, we have language and ball in English, and langue et bal in French. The M, if it's at the beginning of a word, or if it's a double M, makes a M sound, just like in English. So for instance, we have material, and we have the word mother. And in French, we have matière et mère. There's also the word femme, which means woman. If there is a single M at the end of a syllable, it is pronounced in a different way, which we will talk about in another video. N at the beginning of a syllable or a double N, it acts just like the M. So if it's an N or a double N, it makes a N sound. For instance, we have the word night or Cayenne, like nuit or Cayenne in French. In another video, we'll also talk about how to pronounce the single N when it's at the end of a syllable, because it makes a different sound. The NG, the ing, makes the sound just like in English. So this sound doesn't occur very often in French, just like it occurs a lot more often in English actually, but in French not so much. So for instance, we have parking lot and campsite. In French we have camping et parking. When you see the GN together, it makes a ñ sound, just like in the word onion or canyon. So in French we can say oignon et gagnon. The P, makes the same sound it does in English as it does in French. Some examples are permit and cape, and in French we say permis et cap. S makes the same sound in English, s, when it's at the beginning of a word or if it's a double S. In English we have the words survival and race, and in French we would say survie et race. The S in between two vowels, as well as the Z sound, make a Z. So just like in the word dozen or cousin in English, or douzaine and cousin in French. The CH and the SH sounds both make the sound sh. Now this is a bit different than English, so it can be confusing. In English, the CH makes a ch sound, but in French it's always sh, like in the word bush or shingle. And in French we have champion et tache. The T sound in French makes the same sound it does in English. So we have the word translate and the word mat. While in French we say traduire et mat. French and English have the same V sound as well. There is vendor and pave in English, and in French we have vendeur et lave-vaisselle. The double L or the Y both make the Y sound. This sound is like the Y sound in you and pay in English. Some examples are fille et paille, meaning straw. The IR, IE makes a Y sound. This sound is just like the Y sound in you and pay in English, with an A sound added on afterwards. Some examples from French are marié et marié, same pronunciation. The W isn't very common in French. Normally, W words in English become OU words in French. OU at the start of the syllable makes a W sound, just like in the English words woman and west. Some French examples are ours et ouest. The W isn't very common in French. Normally, W words in English become OU words in French. OU at the start of the syllable makes a W sound, just like in the words woman and west. Some French examples of this are oui and ouest. For our vowel sounds, the A sounds the same more or less as it does in English. Some English examples are madame and card. In French, we say madame et carte. The I, unlike in English, French has only one I sound, whereas in English we have I and I. They don't have the I sound. The I is always pronounced like I, as in peel or eel. Some French examples are illustré and fille. There are two different types of O sounds in French. We have O and we have A. O is pronounced when O comes before ZI or ME, like in rose or rhum. It is also pronounced as O when a word has the accent circonflexe, which we'll talk about in another video, like the word chômage. It also is pronounced like O if there's an EAU spelling, like chateau. For A, all other pronunciations of O are A, like in organization or tornado, specifically the first O. So we say in French, organisation and tornade. In the next few videos, I will talk about more complicated French sounds and how to pronounce them. See you in the next video. Bonjour mes amis. In this video, we're going to be talking about silent sounds. So I really won't be doing that much talking. So the first silent sound that we have in French is the silent H. So the H is always silent in French. It is never, ever, ever pronounced. The only difference is sometimes it's aspirated and sometimes it's unaspirated. But this we'll talk about later on in the course. So for instance, we have the words ok and So notice that I'm not pronouncing them at all. The next silent letter is the S. So whenever you have an S at the end of a word, it is always silent. The exception to this is sometimes the S will link with the word that comes afterwards, and then it gets pronounced as a Z. This is also something we'll talk about in another lesson. but most of the time you can assume that the S at the end of a word is silent. Just like the S, the E, when it's found at the end of a word, is always silent. The only exception to this is when you listen to French songs, sometimes they'll actually pronounce silent E's just for dramatic effect or to increase the flow of the actual song. The next one is X. Whenever X is found at the end of a word, it is always silent and it acts in the same way as the S. So it will link to the next word afterwards if the next word begins with a vowel, but again, we will go over this in another video. But otherwise, the X is just like the S and it is usually silent at the end of a word. So for instance, we have the word cadeau and dix voitures. Dix voitures. So we don't actually pronounce the X there. Another silent sound in French is the T. Whenever you see a T at the end of a word, it is always silent as well. Like the S and the X, it sometimes gets pronounced with the next word if the next word begins with a vowel, but again, we will cover that in another video. An example of this is the word et, which means and, et, et, and. Those are the main silent sounds that we have in French. There are a lot of silent sounds, but as you start to learn the vocabulary, you'll pick up which sounds are normally pronounced and which sounds aren't. It is one of the more challenging aspects of learning French, is that a lot of the sounds are not pronounced, or they're pronounced in a way that you wouldn't necessarily expect. So use this video as a guide, but also keep in mind that there are lots of other quirks and silent sounds to the French pronunciation. So we'll see you in the next video. Bonjour mes amis, hello my friends, and welcome back to another video of French pronunciation. In this video, which is the toughest of the ones that we've been working through so far, we're going to talk about tough sounds to pronounce in French. There are a couple, and these are the sounds that English speakers have the most challenge with. So the first one is the J sound. So if you think about the word mirage in English, the G actually gets pronounced a lot differently than in other G words in English. So the mirage sounds like a J sound. So practice it with me. So we have J, like in mirage, or garage is another example. In French, we use the same sound, and this is how the J is pronounced, as well as the G when it comes before an E or an I. So it's the same sound. So we say je and page, je and page. The next one is the R, and this is definitely one of the most complicated sounds to pronounce. It's a R sound, R. So if you speak any other languages, sometimes this sound is present in those languages. It is really similar to an R that's pronounced in Arabic. It is also close to an R that's pronounced in Brazilian Portuguese as well. But it might be also pronounced in another language. So feel free to comment below with any of the languages you speak, and I'll do a bit of research to find out if that sound exists in your language. So the R sound, how to pronounce it is if you pronounce the word red, for instance, or rouge, like in Baton Rouge in the United States. So just say rouge like you would in English, rouge, 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 and then take your finger and then touch it to the tip of your tongue very lightly, and with a little bit of effort, slowly push the tip of your tongue back towards the back of your mouth, very gently, of course, and just continue to say rouge as you do this, and you'll notice that the R sound transforms into a French R sound. So let me demonstrate. So rouge, 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 rouge. So you see how my R transformed very quickly from rouge to rouge. So the reason why this example works is because in English we pronounce the R at the front of our mouth, around here, but in French we pronounce it at the back of our mouth, close to the uvula. So when we push our tongue back a bit, it forces our tongue to pronounce the R sound further back in the mouth. So give that a try, and over time you'll find that it gets easier to pronounce the French R sound, but that's one way that you can use to pronounce it. So for instance, we have the word restaurant and riche. Restaurant et riche. This is a hard sound, so give yourself some time to practice. The next challenge for English speakers is differentiating between our two E sounds. So we have an E, like in pay, and then we also have an sound, like in pet. So E and pet. So in French, if it's the E, the by itself, or the accent circonflexe, accent grave, it makes an sound. So for instance, we have the word dessin, fêtes, et père. If it's accent aigu, E-T, E-R, A-I, A-I-S, A-I-T, it makes an E sound, such as in parler et manger. Again, if it's an E just at the end of the word, an at the end of a word, it's silent, as we discussed in the silent sounds video. We also have two other sounds which are very, very similar, but they're a bit harder for English speakers to pronounce. So we have the sound so for instance in P and S, and then we have as in peur and sœur. So the only difference between the two sounds, it's very subtle, it's just your mouth is a bit smaller when you do the first one and then a bit bigger when you do the second one. But both are just as complicated for English speakers to pronounce. The next one is the U sounds. We have two different U sounds in French. The first one sounds just like the English U, so for instance, bou and sitsu, but the other U sound is a bit more challenging for English speakers to pronounce. It's the same as the English U, but your mouth is much more pursed. So think about if you ate a lemon, your mouth would be like, or if you were trying to whistle, it'd be. So try that. So instead of saying tu, say tu, tu. See how my mouth gets a lot smaller? Tu, as opposed to tu. So we have bu versus bu, and sitsu versus sitsu. And this is a very important distinction to learn how to make, because this can actually change the meaning of a word. The next ones are also pretty complicated for English speakers to pronounce. They're called our nasal vowel sounds. And the reason why they're called nasal vowels is because we use our nose to actually pronounce the sounds. So whenever you see an M or an N at the end of a syllable, this is where it would be a nasal vowel sound. So we only have 4 in French. So for instance, we have so the number 1, So if you think about I don't want to do this, but then add a little bit of a faint N sound to the end, we say So So you're not actually pronouncing the N. You're not saying un, you're saying The next one is such as in croissant. So think of like that's so cute, and then add a little bit of an N sound to the end. So we say The next one is So this one's the most challenging one to pronounce, in my opinion. So if you think of the word a, like what you do in there, in Canadian English, and then add a faint N sound to that. So we say as in pain, or vin, wine. The final one is on. And this one, if you think of the word own in English, like I own something, and just make the N in own a bit more faint and say on, such as in chanson, chanson. So practice with those sounds. I know they're very challenging, but over time, as you pronounce them, your mouth will learn to pronounce them a lot quicker, and you will learn to master the French pronunciation. So we'll see you in the next video. Bonjour mes amis. In the previous video, we have been focusing on how to pronounce French words. In this video, we're going to be talking about how to pronounce the French alphabet. So notice the distinction between pronouncing the actual words and pronouncing the letters of the alphabet. So this is kind of the difference of saying the A in bat is pronounced A, whereas the actual letter is called A. So the letters of the alphabet are A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, et Z. So now let's run through the alphabet again one more time a bit quicker. So we have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, et Z. So why is it important to learn the alphabet? Well, it's really important to learn the alphabet because if someone's spelling something to you, or if you're spelling something to someone else, like a name, for instance, or the name of a road, the name of a person, it's really important to be able to understand that, because one confusing element is that the I, as we write it in English is actually pronounced as E, the E. So they say H-I-J, where the E as we know it, is actually pronounced as D-E-F. So that's why it's important to learn the alphabet. Bonjour mes amis. In this video, we're going to be talking about how to pronounce the French accents. There are a lot of accents in French, but there's not too many, and I'm confident that you'll be able to learn them in no time. So let's go through them together. The first one is the most common, and this one is the accent aigu. Accent aigu. And this one is found in words like école. The next one is the accent grave, which is also only found above the E, with a couple of exceptions. And this one we would find in the word like crème, cream. The accent grave is also found above the A, the A, or above the U in the word where, où. It's only found in these two words. Otherwise, the accent aigu and the accent grave are found only just above E. The next one is the accent circonflexe, And some examples of these are tête and pôle, And these can be found above any vowel sound, so A, E, I, O, or U, or A, E, I, O, U. The next one is the accent tréma. Most of the time this is found just above the E, or the I, as we know it in English. Occasionally it is found above the and the U, or the E and the U, as we know it in English. Some examples are Taïwan. The next one is la cédille. And this probably looks familiar to you because the cédille is found in the word français. Otherwise, if we didn't have the cédille in this word, it would be pronounced as franqué, and that just sounds wrong. So that's why we don't have it there. That's it for French accents. There's not too many. The most important ones to know by far are the accent aigu and the accent grave. We'll see you in the next video. Au revoir. Bonjour mes amis. In this video, we're going to be talking about how to count in French from the numbers 1 to 20. So let's get started. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. Okay, so why don't you try it and repeat after me? So I'll go a bit slower this time. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. So those are the numbers from 1 to 20 in French.
Bonjour tout le monde. Hello everyone, and welcome to the first learning activity of the course. How this learning activity is going to be structured today is I'm going to show you a sound, a letter, or a number, and you're going to have to say orally how to pronounce it or how to say it. So I'll give you an example. So if you see at the top of the screen there, it will indicate whether it's a sound, whether it's a letter, or whether it's a number. So this one is obviously a sound, so I would pronounce it B, because that's the sound a bee makes in French, B. However, if it said letter, I would say B, because B is how you would pronounce the B sound. And then if it was a number, for example, if it was the number 1, I would say So I'll give you 10 seconds for each slide so that you can determine how to pronounce the word. And then if you look at the next presentation, you'll see that there are a set of corrections. So that will help you guide whether or not you've chosen the correct sound or letter or number, and so on and so forth. So let's begin. Hello again. I hope you enjoyed that activity and that it wasn't too difficult for you. So I'm just going to go over quickly the answers. So this is our example. B, the sound B. 8, the letter M, the sound A. 5, 15, the letter E. 10, the letter H. 12, the sound K. 7, the letter L, the sound J. 18, the letter I. 2, the sound S. 20. This was a trick question. This has no sound because it's an H. H's are silent in French. And the letter D. So that's all, and we will see you in the next presentation. Merci et au revoir.
Bonjour, hello everyone, and welcome to this lesson. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about 10 differences between French and English. So let's get started. The first thing is that French comes from Latin, whereas English is a Germanic language. So we can see the progression of the languages here in the two different diagrams. To the left, we have French. So French originated from Classic Latin, which became Vulgar Latin, which became Old French, which eventually became Modern French, which is what we speak today. English, however, started from Proto-English, which developed from a number of different influences in the area, some of which were German, some of which were from Norway, a number of different areas, and then it developed into Old English, and then into Middle English, and then into New English. And New English is what we speak today, and I believe since we've been speaking since about the 1500s. Same with Modern French, we've been speaking Modern French since about the 1500s as well. So the second thing is that French is a little bit more simplified when it comes to verb tenses. So I know to English speakers who are learning French, it seems like French has a whole wad load of verb tenses. However, English actually has more because English has what we call progressive tenses. So here we have I speak, I'm speaking, and I do speak. So 3 distinct verb forms in English. However, when we translate all 3 of them into French, they're all translated as je parle. So it's a lot easier to learn just the one as opposed to the 3. So that's one difference. The next difference is that all French nouns are classified as either masculine or feminine. And I know this confuses a lot of people who are starting to learn French as a new language. It's best just to think of the masculinity and femininity in French as just classification systems. It doesn't mean that a table, which is considered a feminine noun, it doesn't mean that a table is really a woman dressed up as a table, or a wall is a man dressed up as a wall, because wall in French is masculine. It's just a way to organize the words based on their properties. And it goes back way far into when Latin was a really common language, and it exists in Italian, Portuguese, Spanish, and a bunch of other Latin languages. So that's what it is. It's just a categorization system and a way for them to categorize the words. So don't focus too much on this. French people themselves also get confused, and will mix them up from time to time. So don't worry too much. It's not a huge aspect of the language. Most people will understand you if you mix between the two. Definitely try and learn it, but don't worry too much about the actual gender. It's just 2 different classification systems, which comes from a very old part of the language. Another aspect in French is that usually we don't pronounce the endings of most words. So here we have some French words and then their equivalents. So nous parlons les chansons, les hommes, les femmes. So you'll see that the S's are pretty much not pronounced at the end of the words, except for les hommes, where it makes a Z sound. Whereas in the English equivalents, we speak the songs, the men, the women, all the letters are pronounced. So that's one difference. Another difference is that French doesn't have the ch sound or the j sound like we do in English. Instead, when you see a ch in French, rather than making a ch sound, it makes a sh sound. Sort of like a shard of glass. So the ch makes a sh sound. Similarly, they don't have the j sound either. So whenever you see a j, it makes a zh sound, like in mirage.
that j as opposed to a j. So mirage, that sound. The next aspect is that French uses accents, which change the sound of the word that it's in. So for example, we have, looking at the E's here, we have parle, where the E is not really pronounced. We have parler, where it makes an A sound. We have mer, where it makes an E sound. And then we have bête, where it makes the same sound as in mer, bête, whereas the parler makes an A, and then the E at the end of parle is silent. Next, French has what are called nasal sounds, and these are definitely really difficult to pronounce for English speakers because we don't really notice that we have them in English. Usually, when we use nasal sounds, they're more of a sort of like an accident or like a way for us to speak a lot quicker. But in French, it's necessary that we use them. So here we have the 5 written forms of the nasal sound. So we have en. We have un, we have un, we have on, and we have un. And I know they sound more or less the same, but they are actually different. And as you go along, your ear will start to tune in to the differences in the sounds between them. But just remember that you're not actually pronouncing the N in most of these cases. It's like a very faint N sound. And the reason why they're called nasal is because you use both your nose and your mouth to produce the sounds. And it's something that sort of comes naturally, you don't have to really focus on, but that's why they're called nasal sounds. So en, on. Number 8, French uses liaisons between words to help sentences flow better. So here we have an S. When S is it's usually with S's when they come before a vowel, it makes a Z sound. So for example, les hommes, as opposed to les femmes, where the S isn't pronounced. We have les where the Z is there, as opposed to les bœufs, where the S isn't pronounced. Also, French has a formal and informal versions of salutations to people. So, as we'll learn in the coming lessons, tu is used for informal occasions. So when you're talking to a young child who you know or may not know, or you're talking to a family member or a friend, then you use the informal, which is the tu. If you're talking to someone who you don't know at all, or you're talking to a boss or the queen, for example, someone who you want to be a little bit more formal with, you use the vous, the vous. So here we have tu and vous. And now English used to have this, but it changed years ago, centuries ago, I would say, where we had thou and thee, and then we had you. Thou and thee were actually the informal versions. So thou and thee would be used equivalent to tu. Eventually, over time, people started to be more and more formal with each other to show respect in English. So we continued to use the you, which at that time was formal. As the years progressed, we started to lose the informal form, which was thou and thee, and we started to just adopt the formal form, you, which has now become sort of a all applies sort of word. So you in English is used for everyone, whereas in French they still have the difference between formal and informal. So tu is informal and vous is formal. Finally, in English we have what are called contractions. So when you see do not, you can change it to don't, and it makes it a little faster and a little bit easier. But in English, when we have don't and do not, it's optional to do that contraction. However, in French, it's required. So when we say, for example, something that we'll learn soon is j'ai, which means I have. You can't say je ai or j'ai. You have to say j'ai. There is no option. Whereas in English, you could say do not, or don't. But in French, again, no option. So those are 10 differences between French and English, and hopefully that makes your French journey a little bit easier knowing these differences. And don't look at these differences as an obstacle. Think of them as something interesting and something that's peculiar about the French language that's different from your knowledge of English. So we will see you in the next lesson. Merci.
Bonjour mes amis. In this video, I'd like to take the opportunity to invite you to our French online learning community. If you haven't already heard about it, basically what it is it's a Facebook group that I've put together for all of the students in my French Level 1 and my French Level 2 class to give you all an opportunity to interact with each other and practice speaking French together because Udemy doesn't really allow for that option on here. So I want to invite you to that group right now. Another cool thing about this group is that you get to interact with me a lot more. So I can be there to answer your questions. I'll be there to also share some resources. I'll share interesting information about the French-speaking world, like songs, different articles, videos. I'll also post questions and practice exercises for you to do so that you can have something to talk about with the other people that are in the online learning community. You will find throughout this course that there are a couple of assignments that are linked with the online group. They are, of course, optional activities. You don't necessarily need to join the group, but I thought it would be a really good opportunity for everyone to kind of come together and practice. So if you are interested in joining our French learning community on Facebook, all you have to do is there's a link in the supplemental resources of this lecture. Follow that, it'll bring you to Facebook. You just log into your Facebook account and then you just request access. The next time I'm on Facebook, I will approve the access, of course. So I look forward to chatting with you more there, and we'll see you in the next video. À bientôt! Hi everyone! In this lesson, we're going to learn different ways to say hello to people in French. This is a great way to start a conversation with someone or simply just be nice. The most common form of hello is bonjour. It means hello, but it can also be translated as good morning. You can use bonjour at any point of the day, but it is most commonly used in the morning and the afternoon. You can also say salut, which means hi. It is a bit more informal, but it is used every day and very common. Salut can also be used as an informal goodbye. This is kind of similar to the word ciao in Italian, which can be used to mean hi and bye. Bonsoir is another word that you can use to say hi, but this is more common to be used in the evening because it can also be translated as good evening. This is typical of a time when it's about 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. Or even later, depending on your region. A very formal greeting is bon après-midi, which means good afternoon. Even in English, this is a very formal greeting, so it's not really an everyday expression. A really informal way to greet someone is by saying ça va. In the next video, we will learn that comment ça va means how are you or how's it going. Ça va is a shortened version of how are you or comment ça va. And it's used in a similar way to saying sup in English, except it's a bit more common. It is a really informal way of saying hey while also asking how it's going. So those are all the important ways to say hello. I'll see you in the next video. Salut! Salut! In this video, we're going to be talking about introducing yourself. So after you said hello and initiated the conversation with your conversation partner, we'll move on into asking questions. So the first question is, comment vous appelez-vous? Which means, what's your name? And this is the formal way of saying it. So if you're talking to your boss, someone who is who you want to impress, the queen, for example, would be someone who you would be formal to, or just someone that you don't know. We would say, comment vous appelez-vous? If you do know the person, whether it's a family member or a friend, or even a young child as well, we would say, comment t'appelles-tu? Comment t'appelles-tu? So, comment vous appelez-vous? And comment t'appelles-tu? And then you would respond with je m'appelle, which means my name is, and then you would put your name at the end. So for example, je m'appelle Dillon. Je m'appelle Dillon. My name is Dylan. Another common question is comment ça va? Comment ça va? And what this means is it means how are you, but it also means how is it going? So sort of a mix in between the two. And one of two ways that you could respond is ça va bien, which means either it's going well or I'm well. Another option is to say ça va mal, which means it's going bad or I'm bad. So again, ça va bien, ça va mal. The next one is quel est votre métier? Quel est votre métier? So what's your profession or your job or your vocation? Quel est votre métier? And then you would respond with je suis, and then you would fill in the blank. So for example, with a musician, je suis musicien, je suis musicien. So I'm a musician, which I'm actually not, but the person in the picture is a musician, so we'll go with that. However, in French, what's one thing that's different is that they don't add an A there. So in English, we say I'm a musician, but in French, they would just say I'm musician. So je suis musicien. And then you could fill in the blank with your profession right there. Quel âge avez-vous? Quel âge avez-vous? And this is a way to ask someone how old they are. So, how old are you? Quel âge avez-vous? And a response could be j'ai 30 ans. So using the numbers we learned in the section before, you would input the number that you are, and then you would say that. So for example, j'ai 30 ans, like the man in the picture there. So that would mean I'm 30 years old. So that's all for this lesson, and in the next video we'll move on to saying goodbye, so finishing our conversations. Merci. Bonjour, welcome to the third part of this section. This section is called Goodbyes and Gratitude, so we'll be talking about how to finish off your starting conversations with people. So a simple way to end a conversation is to just say goodbye. So au revoir, au revoir. This literally means we will see each other again. But in terms of regular translation, it would be goodbye, au revoir, au revoir. Another one is bonne journée, bonne journée, have a great day. Another is bonne soirée, which is different from bonsoir. Bonsoir is a greeting, whereas bonne soirée is a goodbye. Have a great evening. Bonne nuit, and this could mean either good night or have a great night, which are both goodbyes, as in French as well as in English. Bonne nuit. À bientôt, which means see you soon. À bientôt. À plus tard, which means see you later. And now moving on to some forms of gratitude. So, s'il vous plaît means please, s'il vous plaît. And s'il vous plaît is used in formal instances. So if it's your boss or the queen, for example, or king, or someone that you just generally don't know, we would use s'il vous plaît. However, if it's a family member, a friend, or a young child, we would say s'il te plaît, s'il te plaît. Donc, s'il vous plaît, s'il te plaît. Merci, which is thank you. Merci. And finally, de rien, which means you're welcome. Literally, it means of nothing. De rien. So that's all for the lesson on putting together simple conversations. Really practice those and make sure that you master those 3 different components of putting together a conversation. In the next video, we'll be focusing on doing a practice conversation activity. So try and take part in that and see how well you've learned the different components of the conversation and the different aspects that you still need to learn as we move forward. Merci. Bonjour mes amis. In this exercise, we're going to be doing 2 conversation practices. So how it's going to work is I'm going to pretend to have a conversation with you. So, and it sort of requires some of your participation as well. So how it's going to work is I will say something, and then I'll wait a couple seconds for your response. And then I will say something again in anticipation of what you would say, and then you would say your response again. And you would also, there is also an indication of when you will speak. So we'll go through a run through really quickly. So for example, with conversation 1, I will say bonjour. I will wait a couple of seconds for your response, which is the blue bar there. And then we'll proceed on to the next question, which is be comment ça va? You would respond, and then you would also say et vous to sort of continue the conversation and reciprocate. So, and you, what do you think? That's sort of the translation. Then we would continue. Ça va bien, merci. Quel âge as-tu? And then you would respond, again say et vous, and then we would continue on until it ends. And then when the conversation ends, there will be a purple bar which says end of conversation 1. So let's go back. Okay, so conversation 1. Bonjour. Comment ça va? Ça va bien, merci. Quel âge as-tu? J'ai 31 ans. Au revoir. End of conversation 1. So now what we'll do is we'll begin conversation 2, take a deep breath. It is a really difficult skill to sort of get into the groove of starting conversations, but definitely practice it and continue to practice it because it's really, really useful when you're put into a situation so that you feel most comfortable. Conversation 2. Salut. Ça va? Bien, merci. Comment t'appelles-tu? Je m'appelle Dylan. Salut! And that's the end of conversation 2. So I hope you enjoyed that exercise. If you wanted to try it again, feel free, give it a go and see how it goes. If you have any questions about any of the vocabulary that I use, let me know in the discussion section, which is right next to the video here, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. Merci, à bientôt. Salut mes amis. In this video, we're going to be talking about how to start building sentences. So first off, before we can start building sentences, we need to know how to create verbs. So the most important verb in French is the verb être. So in French, unlike in English for the most part, the verb changes depending on who's speaking. So it's kind of like in English how we say I am, but you are. So we say am if it's me that's doing it, but are if it's you that is doing it. So it's a bit different in French because we do that with all of our verbs, not just with a couple like we do in English. So you'll notice that throughout the course. So to say I am, in French, we say je suis. To say he is, we say il est. She is elle est. If we want to say it is, it's a bit different. So there's not really a neutral word for it in French. So most of the time, we'll distinguish between whether it is masculine or whether it is feminine. If it is masculine, then we'll say il est, so just like he is. So il est can mean he is or it is. And then if it is feminine, we'll say elle est. So elle est means she is or it is. If we want to say we are, we say nous sommes, nous sommes. There's also a second way to say we are, and that is on est, on est. There's not really a difference between the two, but on is used more in like informal speech and more when you're speaking, whereas nous is used more in writing and usually in like older kind of speeches you'll hear nous. To say they, we also have two words, just like il and elle. So these are il, elle. Notice that the S at the end is actually silent, so that's a bit confusing. Ils sont and elles sont. So il est, elle est, he is, it is, she is, it is. Then we say ils sont, elles sont, they are, they are. So if they is masculine or they is masculine and feminine, it's a group, it's a mixed group, we say ils sont. If it's a group of just feminine people or things, we say elles sont. Okay? And then finally, if you want to say you are, there's two different ways that we say you are. You can say tu es or vous êtes. So tu is used when you're speaking to someone that you know, you're speaking informally, and it's just one person. So if I say, what are you doing this weekend? I would say tu. If I was talking to my two friends, and I said, what are you both doing this weekend? I use vous. Or, So if I'm talking to multiple people, we use vous. Or if I'm talking to someone who I want to show a lot of respect to, such as my boss or maybe an elected official or an elder, I would say vous just for one person. So if I was talking to maybe the Prime Minister of Canada, I might say, what are you doing this weekend? Vous. And then we would say vous êtes. So we have tu es and then vous êtes. So just to summarize, we have je suis, tu es, il est, elle est, on est, nous sommes, vous êtes, ils sont, and elles sont. And you can combine any one of these with an adjective to form a small, simple sentence. So in the next video, we'll be talking about adjectives and how to use them to form simple sentences to make them even bigger. So we'll see you in the next video. Au revoir. Salut everyone. Now that we've learned how to make simple sentences with être, now let's talk about how to make simple sentences with another verb. And this verb is just as important as the verb être. This verb is avoir, which means to have. And now it might not seem as important as être, but it is a very important verb in the French language. In fact, être and avoir are the two most important verbs in French. Just like être, and all verbs for that matter in French actually, avoir changes depending on who's talking, depending on who the subject is, or who's performing the action. So there are specific conjugations for avoir, just like there were for être. So here are the conjugations for avoir. We have j'ai, I have, and notice that je, when it comes before a vowel, it loses its e, and we add an apostrophe to the j. This is because it's easier for us to pronounce. It would be a lot more difficult to say je ai rather than just j'ai. If we say j'ai, there's a bit more of a melody to it. So that's why we say it like that. It's kind of the same way in English how we say can't versus cannot. But in English, this is an optional thing, whereas in French, this is actually required. So we have to say j'ai. The next one is tu as, you have. Remember that this you is used for a person who you want to speak with informally, such as a child or a person that you know really well. Next is il a, he has, or it has for masculine nouns. And then elle a, she has, or it has for feminine nouns. The next is on a, we have. Nous avons, we have. Vous avez, you have, for when you're talking to multiple people or when you're talking to someone formally. Ils ont, and notice here we have the liaison, we have a link. So we have ils ont, notice the pronunciation, the S actually does get pronounced this time. Elles ont, they have, so ils ont, they have, elles ont, they have. One is for the masculine, one is for the feminine, and ils ont is also used for a mixed group. We have ils ont and elles ont. Remember that ils ont is used for a mixed group of masculine and feminine, or just masculine individuals. Elles ont is just for feminine, a group of feminine. You'll also notice that when I pronounced it, ils ont, elles ont, the S in il, elle, which is normally silent, was actually pronounced, and I pronounced it like a Z. This was intentional. This is actually how you have to pronounce it. The S is always silent at the end of a word, except when there's something that comes after it, which would be a vowel. So in this case, because on, O-N-T, begins with a vowel sound, we link the two sounds together. So we say ils ont, elles ont. Just like être, I strongly encourage you to become familiar with avoir and être because they really are very, very important, and they are the foundation to mastering French verbs because they will really come in handy further on down the road. With avoir specifically, there are a couple of very useful expressions that you can use to kind of spruce up your conversations. So these are the expressions that are really useful. So we have avoir besoin de. So if you need something, you can use this expression, which literally means to have need of something. For example, we can say, Eric a besoin de café. Eric needs coffee. You can also say, j'ai besoin d'aide, or I need help. The next one is avoir chaud ou avoir froid. To say you're hot or cold, we use avoir. Tu as chaud, are you hot? Or ils ont froid, they are cold. You might be wondering why we don't use the verb être when talking about I am cold, you are cold, because we do that in English. If you say il est froid or il est chaud in French, it suggests that they have they've touched and felt their skin and they're physically cold from your perspective, or maybe they're a cold in personality. And then il est chaud has a bit of a kind of an inappropriate meaning to it as well. So I'll let you look that one up on your own. The next expression is avoir faim, and avoir soif. We also use avoir for expressing hunger. In French, vous avez faim, are you hungry? Note that faim, F-A-I-M, is pronounced as faim. And Monique et toi avez soif. Monique et toi avez soif. Monica and you are thirsty. If someone you know doesn't feel well, you can use this expression, avoir mal. Nous avons mal, we aren't well. Avoir peur means to be scared or fearful. For example, Marc et Sophie ont peur. Mark and Sophie are fearful. Avoir raison means to be right, whereas avoir tort means to be wrong. So if we say tu as raison, j'ai tort, it means you are right, I am wrong. This is a very useful expression. Another expression is Élise a sommeil, or Élise is sleepy. Avoir sommeil means to be sleepy. So that's it for this video. In the next couple of videos, we're going to be talking more about how to build a simple sentence to really get you practicing your speaking and practicing your writing skills. So we'll see you in the next video. Au revoir. Bonjour mes amis. In this video, we're going to be talking about how to make some of the simple sentences we just learned into negative sentences. So in English, we would say, I am French versus I am not French. So in English, we just add the word not and it's good to go. In French, we use two words. So we use the words ne and pas. So the ne goes before the verb and the pas goes after the verb. So we say, je ne suis pas français or je ne suis pas anglaise. And then for avoir, if you want to say I don't have any of something, we say ne pas de. So if you say je n'ai pas de chien, nous n'avons pas de chien. So there you have it. So that's how you make negative sentences. You really just put the ne around the ne and the pas around the verb, or the ne and the pas de around the verb if you want to say not any. So ne pas not, ne pas de, not any. So there we have it. Don't forget to test out some of the practice exercises to really try practicing building those small short sentences and then also making those small short sentences negative. So we'll see you in the next video. Au revoir.
Bonjour. Hello everyone and welcome to today's vocabulary. We're just going to be talking about a new set of vocabulary for this module. So let's begin. C'est, ce sont, le chien, le chat, la télévision, l'ordinateur, la radio, le livre, la table, le frigo, la tasse, la bouteille, le bol, l'assiette, le four, la chaise, la porte, le divan, le bureau, la salle, le jeu vidéo, le portable, le téléphone, le lit, and la maison. So that's this week's vocabulary. Try and memorize it so that you have a good concrete vocabulary so that you'll be able to start forming sentences when we focus on that in the next coming modules. Au revoir.
Bonjour mes amis. In this video, we're going to be talking about the indefinite article in French. So we already talked about the definite article, which is the in English, or le, la, les in French. So in French, the indefinite article is un, une, des. So we have three of them, just kind of like the definite article. The difference between the definite article and the indefinite article is in English, the definite article is the, and in French, in English, the definite article is the, and the indefinite article is a or an sometimes. So in the singular, we say un et une, but then in the plural, we say des. So I'll show you a couple of examples here. So for instance, we have for a cat, we have un chat, If you want to say a woman, we say une femme. For a man, we say un homme. And then for a table, we say une table. And then when we say plural, in English we don't have a plural indefinite article. We'll say some tables, some TVs, some water bottles, etc. So it's the same thing in French. So they say des, meaning some, to pluralize it. So if you want to say un chat, des chats, a cat, some cats, une fille, des filles, un homme, des hommes, une table, des tables. So that's all that I wanted to mention on the indefinite article. It's pretty straightforward and pretty similar to how we use it in English, whereas the definite article, it's a bit different of a usage, but the indefinite article, like I said, is pretty similar to how we would normally use it in English. So we will see you in the next video. À bientôt!
Bonjour mes amis. Today what we're going to be talking about is how to say the and a in French. Now I know these might seem a little insignificant, but they actually play a huge role in languages, and especially in French, and now we'll talk about them together. So let's start with the. So the in English and in French always comes before a noun, and a noun being a person, place, or a thing. But in French, unfortunately, there are 4 forms of the, and I'll tell you why in a little bit, but these forms are le, la, L with an apostrophe, les. So the 4 different forms are used in these different situations. So as you may have guessed by now, a lot of the French words don't really have the same pronunciation as the English does. So at the end of a French word, you tend not to pronounce the ending. So if you look at the example of le garçon and les garçons, garçon without an S and garçon with an S sounds exactly the same. So it poses a little bit of a problem because when you're listening to spoken French, how are you supposed to tell whether someone's talking about one boy, un garçon, or multiple boys, plusieurs garçons? So the articles in French specifically really help us to identify whether something is plural or whether it's singular. So in the example of le garçon and les garçons, the le tells us that it's one boy, the boy, whereas les garçons tells us that they're talking about multiple boys, les garçons. Unfortunately, in English, we do have this issue where we say the, but it's for both singular and plural. However, in English, we hear the z, the s sound at the end. So boy and boys. So there's that differentiation, which doesn't happen in French. So that's why we need the le and the les. So le is used before masculine singular words. So for example, le chien, le garçon, the dog, the boy. La is used before feminine singular words. So for example, la fille, la table, the girl, the table. And then the L with the apostrophe, or L apostrophe as we call it in French, so L apostrophe, is used before any singular word that begins with a vowel. And vowels are a little different in French. So just as we do in English, we have A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y, but in French they have sometimes H as well. So a good portion of the words that begin with H are actually vowels. So for example, the word because also H's are silent, so that's part of the reason. So l'homme, so we say l'homme, and then l'eau, so the man and the water. And finally, les we use before plural nouns. So for example, les garçons and les filles, the boys and the girls. So when do you use le, la, l'apostrophe, and les? So some of these are similar to English, some of these are very different. So this is what causes a little bit of confusion among French learners. So first of all, we'll start with the easy one, so where it's the same as in English. So when you want to specify a noun, so when you want to say, I'm talking about the girl, I'm not just talking about any girl, but I'm talking about the girl. So the one that you've probably already made reference to. So for example, je parle à la fille, je parle à la fille. I speak or I talk to the girl. Je parle à l'homme, I talk to the man. However, here's where it differs from English. So when you want to talk about a noun in a general sense, we would do this. So if you wanted to say John or Jean eats apples, we would say Jean mange la pomme. So we're talking about apples in a general sense. So Jean really likes to eat apples. So apples being sort of like a general image of apples. So we would say la pomme to represent this. So in French, the nouns are almost about 95% of the time found with le, la, les, or with
un, une, des, which is what we're going to talk about shortly, as opposed to English, where I would say it's about 60% of the time, where English doesn't always have a the or an a before their nouns. Okay, so another example is le pain est délicieux. Bread is delicious. So again, just the general concept, general idea of bread is delicious. So we would say le pain. So we would add that in there. So when in doubt and you're not really sure what to add something. Don't just leave it sort of hanging there. Also, when you want to refer to a language or a subject in school, or like a discipline or a theory or something like that, you would use the le, la, les as well. So for example, j'étudie l'espagnol. I'm studying Spanish. You could do this with psychology. J'étudie la psychologie. You can do with mathematics. J'étudie les mathématiques. So a number of different aspects under that category there. And then finally, to talk about a country. In French, all countries, well, actually, a good portion of the countries are preceded by an article, so de, la, les. So for example, le Canada or les États-Unis. So in English, we would say the United States, but we wouldn't say the Canada. We would just say Canada, where they would say le Canada, la France, l'Espagne, the Spain. They would say l'Espagne. But we'll talk more about this later in a couple of sections where we'll talk more about countries. So moving on to a. So a can come in different forms in English. So we actually have 3 different forms. We have a, an, and some. And these always come before a noun, a person, or a place, or a thing. So there are 3 forms, like I said, a, an, and some. And then in French, there's also 3 forms. We have un, une, and des. So let's talk more about these forms. So un is used before masculine singular words, just as le was. So un chien, un homme, a dog, a man, which is different from le chien, l'homme, which is the dog, the man. Un comes before feminine singular words. So we have une fille, une table, a girl, a table, as opposed to la fille, la table, the girl, the table. And then finally we have des. Des comes before plural nouns, regardless of whether it's masculine or if it's feminine. So we have des garçons and des filles, which is different from les garçons et les filles. So des garçons et des filles is some boys and some girls. Les garçons et les filles are the boys and the girls. Okay. So when do you use un, une, des? So you use them to talk about any noun in a non-specific sense. So I'll explain this a little bit more. So we have je parle à une fille, so I talk to a girl, so just as we would in English. Je parle à un homme, I talk to a man, so again very general. Elle mange une orange, she's eating an orange, so again very general. So in English we would say a, so French is used the exact same way as we do in English with the a. However, going back to the le, la, les, the le, la, les is used in a general sense, so to talk about a concept or an idea, such as the idea of eating an orange, the idea of studying psychology, the idea of learning a language type of thing. And that's where we would use the le, la, les, whereas this one is we are talking about a specific noun. It's just we're not talking about a specific piece of that noun. So for example, a girl, so it could be any girl. We're talking about a man, or it could be any man, as opposed to when we say I'm studying French with le, la, les, where it's the concept. You're talking about the overall concept. Whereas this is just the un, une, des is just a part of that sort of group. So we have je parle à la fille, which is I'm talking to the girl, or je parle à une fille, where I talk to a girl, or j'étudie le français, I'm studying French. Okay. So one slight difference where we would use it in French and we wouldn't use it in English is that when we would use it in English but not use it in French, is when you talk about an occupation. And I talked about this a little bit before in one of the previous sections. So if you were to say, I am a professor, we would say a in English, but in French we don't do this. So we would say, je suis professeur, or je suis médecin, I'm a doctor. But in French we don't add the un, une, or des for this. So that's all for this lesson. Hope you enjoyed, and hopefully everything was clear. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the discussion section, which is just next to the video here, and I'll be sure to answer them and help you out with those. Merci.
Bonjour tout le monde. Hello everyone. Today we're going to be talking about adjectives. So what are adjectives? Adjectives are descriptive words like colors, things that describe size, things that describe length, quality, quantity, and so many more. There's so many things that are adjectives, but in essence, they're just descriptive words. So adjectives in French, they're unlike in English. Adjectives have 4 different forms most of the time. There's a masculine singular form, a feminine singular form, a masculine plural form, and a feminine plural form. And each agrees with the noun that it's associated with. So, for example, if I'm talking about a dog, le chien, because chien is masculine and there's just one dog, I would be using the masculine singular form of the adjective. If there's more than one dog, then I would be using the masculine plural form of the adjective for les chiens. The same thing goes if I was to talk about a table, la table, which is feminine. But I'll get into that later. So there's a number of basic rules that sort of govern how adjectives agree with the nouns that they're associated with. So the main rule is that usually the adjective will be found in the masculine form. That's sort of considered its most neutral form. So if you were to look it up in a dictionary or something, it would appear in the masculine singular form. So in order to make something feminine, an adjective feminine, you would add an E, and then if you wanted to make it plural, you would add an S. So very similar to making nouns plural, and very straightforward for the feminine adjectives. So a good example is grande. So grande is masculine singular and doesn't have anything on the end. But for feminine, you would add an E, so grande, and then for the masculine plural, grande with an S, and then for the feminine plural, it'll be grande with an E and an S. And please note that they all sound exactly the same, which makes it confusing, but it's easy when you're reading it. And then another example is petit. So we have petit and then petite. So it doesn't sound the same for this one. Petite is the feminine singular version, whereas the petit is the masculine singular version. And same thing, you just add an es for the feminine plural and then just an s for the plural. A second rule is that you add an x for the masculine plural. For words ending in eau, like nouveau, you would add an x to the masculine plural. So they both sound the same, nouveau and nouveau. The third rule is that if the masculine singular form of the adjective ends in t, l, or n, then you would double the last consonant and then add e. So for example, the t would become tte, the l would become lle, and the n would become nne. One example is italien, so italien, italienne, italien with an s, italienne with an s for the feminine plural. Rule number 4, if the masculine singular form ends in E, the feminine form doesn't change. It just remains the same. So, which means that one example is jeune. So for jeune, the masculine and the feminine singular form are the exact same, and same with the masculine and feminine plural forms. Those are the exact same. You just add an S to make it plural. Now, there's many different adjective rules, unfortunately, but some other ones that are quite common are O, which changes to L, A, which changes to R, O, which changes to uz, and ter, which changes to tuz. But there's plenty more. There's also irregular ones too, but you'll sort of learn those as you go along. They're not super common. Most of the rules that we just talked about in this lesson are the most used and the most common ones. So word order. Where do adjectives go in a sentence? So in English, adjectives usually come before the nouns. So for example, the red dogs, the big TV, the little cup, that sort of thing. So the adjective, the descriptive word, always, most of the time, comes before the noun. However, in French, it's quite the opposite. So most of the time in French, the adjective will follow the noun. So les chiens rouges. So rouge is the descriptive word, and it's coming after the person, place, or thing, the noun. However, adjectives sometimes come before nouns, which is very similar to English. And the way that you can remember which adjectives come before the nouns is by using the acronym BAGS. So in BAGS, B-A-G-S, stands for beauty, age, goodness, and size. So what this means is that any adjectives that describe beauty, age, goodness, or size will come before the noun. So for an example of beauty would be beau, le beau chien, the beautiful dog. An example of age would be le jeune enfant, the young child. Jeune is the descriptive word. Goodness would be le bon homme, so the good man. Bon is the adjective. And then size would be le um, an example would be la grasse fille, so like the fat woman would be another example. Other important adjectives are bon, which is good, beau, which is beautiful, grande, which is big, petit is little, and then mauvais is bad. So that's all for today, and I hope you have a great evening, and we will see you tomorrow. Bonne journée, au revoir. Salut, bonjour, hello everyone, and welcome to this week's vocabulary lesson. So let's begin. Rouge, rouge. Vert, vert, verte, verte. The first one is masculine, while the second one is feminine. Jaune, jaune. Brun, brun. Brune, brune. First one is masculine, while the second one is feminine. Bleu, 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 bleu. While they both sound the same, the first one is masculine and the second one is feminine. Violet, violet, violette, violette. First one is masculine and the second one is feminine. Orange, orange. Noir, 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 noir. First one is masculine and the second one is feminine. Blanc, blanc, blanche, blanche. First one again is masculine, second one is feminine. Grande, 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 grande. The first one is masculine, the second one is feminine. The second one has a little, slightly more emphasis on the D in the second one. Petit, petit, petite, petite. First one masculine, second one feminine. Bon, bon, bonne, bonne. First one masculine, second one feminine. Mauvais, mauvais, mauvaise, mauvaise. First one masculine, second one feminine. Facile, facile. Difficile, difficile. Important, important, importante, importante. First one masculine, second one feminine again. Intelligent, intelligent, intelligente, intelligente. First one masculine, second one feminine. Gentil, gentil, gentille, gentille. First one masculine, second one feminine. The second one has a longer L sound. Gentil as opposed to gentil. Sympathique, sympathique. Sometimes you'll also just see sympa, sympa, which is the same thing, meaning nice. Jeune, jeune, different from jaune, which is yellow. Jaune, this is jeune, jeune, young. Vieux, vieux, vieille, vieille. First one masculine, second one feminine. Fou, faux, folle, folle. First one masculine, second one feminine. Beau, beau, belle, belle. First one masculine, second one feminine. Long, long, longue, longue. First one masculine, second one feminine. Cœur, cœur, courte, courte. First one masculine, second one feminine. Sale, sale. And propre, propre. So those are all the vocabulary for this week's lesson. Merci et au revoir. Bonjour à tous, bonjour à toutes. Today what we're going to talk about is l'heure et le temps, so the time and the weather. I should note before we begin that l'heure is referred to as the time, as in like what time is it, et le temps is referred to as the weather. Sometimes, however, le temps can be used to refer to time in general, like the concept of time, like time flies when you're having fun, like that type of time. That's when you use temps. However, if we're talking about like 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock, that's l'heure, the hour, the time, l'heure. But usually when you refer to le temps, it refers to the weather. So how do we ask what time it is? So in French we would say quelle heure est-il? What time is it? Quelle heure est-il? And then your response could be il est 8h30. So looking back to the numbers that we talked about in the first section, those will come in handy during this section when we talk about the dates and the times. So one thing to note about the time in French is that French uses the 24-hour clock for the most part. In some regions, they're starting to transition more to the 12-hour clock, just as we mostly do in English. In Quebec, you'll see a lot of people using the 12-hour clock more so than you would in France. But for the most part, French will use the 24-hour clock. So we would say il est 1h, and it would be depicted like that. So they don't use the colons like we have in English. They would do 1 and then a little h. So just as I have written there. So il est 1h, il est 3h, il est 23h, which would be 1 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, and then we would have 11 p.m. 23h. Another thing that they do in French that we also do in English is that we have our relative time. So instead of saying it's 3:15, we would say it's quarter after 3. Now personally, I don't really like this even in English. I don't tend to use it, but some people do. So this is really useful when trying to understand those that do use it, or if you're one of those people that really likes to use this, this is something that you can use as well. So here we have un quart, which is a quarter. So in the example here we have 3:15, which is il est 3h15, so it's 3 o'clock and a quarter. Or you can say il est 3h15, which is just reading out the time regularly. We can also say il est 4h moins le quart, so it's 4 o'clock minus a quarter. Okay, or il est 3h45, it's 3:45. We also have the word demi, which means half. And then in the example 3:30, we can say il est 3h30, il est 3h30. So we don't have an equivalent of this in Canadian or American English, but in British English they would say, I believe that they would say it's half 3. It's half 3. So il est 3h30. So I believe that there's more or less connected. And then you can also just say il est 3h30, just as we would in English. Another thing that's become more and more common for those places that will use the 12-hour clock is to specify the time of day, just as you would do in Spanish or Italian, or even in English too. They don't have an equivalent of like PM or AM in Spanish, Italian, or French, so this is how they would specify, and then you would also hear this in English as well. But il est 9h du matin, so it's 9 in the morning. Il est midi, which is it's noon. Il est 2h de l'après-midi, it's 2 in the afternoon. Il est 8h du soir, it's 8 at night. And then we also have il est minuit, it's midnight. So moving on, we're going to talk a little bit about the weather. So how do you ask about the weather? We would say, que temps fait-il?
what is the weather like? Que temps fait-il? And some typical responses you hear is il pleut, which means it's raining, or il neige, which means it's snowing. So il pleut and il neige are different from what we're going to talk about today in terms of the other weather, but when you say it's raining or it's snowing, we would use il pleut or il neige, and I'll talk about why in a little bit. So with the weather, we use the verb faire, which you will learn in the next coming modules, if not in the second level more so. So for example, we would say il fait froid, which means it's cold. So we don't say il est froid, we would say il fait froid, which is a different verb. And faire, for those of you who are trying to make those connections and those who have heard this verb before, faire generally means to do or to make. So it's a little odd that il fait froid means it makes cold or it does cold. And my sort of theory on this is that it sort of dates back to maybe Roman mythology, because they do the same thing in Spanish and they do the same thing in Italian as well. So it may date back to Roman mythology where there was gods responsible for doing different things. So there is probably a god responsible for making the weather. So when they say il fait froid, it could have been he makes cold. For example, a god makes something cold or makes the air cold, or the god makes something hot. So that's sort of my theory, and hopefully that'll help you to sort of rationalize why it's like this. So here we have il fait froid, it's cold. Il fait chaud, it's hot. Il fait nuageux, it's cloudy. Il fait du soleil, it's sunny. Il fait du vent, it's windy. Il fait beau, it's nice out. Il fait mauvais, it's bad out. However, going back to what we did in the previous slide is that for it's raining or it's snowing, we say il neige or il pleut. So the reason why these are different is because il fait froid, il fait chaud, etc. They're all states. So when it's hot, it's not just hot for a moment, it's hot for sort of a period of time. Whereas when it's raining and it's snowing, it's actually an action. So you can actually physically see the rain moving, and you can actually physically see the snow falling down. So you can rationalize this again with the God sort of theory. He rains or he snows type of thing. So it's an action that they're performing as opposed to a state that they're making when you say it's cold, it's hot, etc. So hopefully that helps clear it up, and hopefully now you'll be able to more clearly express the weather using faire, il pleut and il neige, as well as being able to express the time in the 24-hour clock. One tip that I would give is maybe change your phone or your calendar or your computer to the 24-hour clock to help you sort of get adjusted to working with the 24-hour clock and how that works. So that's all for this lesson. Merci et à bientôt. Salut aux étudiants et aux étudiantes. Today we're going to be talking about les mois et les saisons, or months and seasons. So let's get started. We're going to start with the seasons, just because they're there's fewer of them and they're more vague. So we have le printemps, which is the spring, le printemps. We have l'été, which is the summer. We have l'automne, which is the fall or autumn, whichever you prefer, but l'automne for both. We have l'hiver for the winter. And then now with the months. So our first month is janvier, and you'll also note that the seasons as well as the months are always written in lowercase letters. In French, they don't see them as proper nouns, so whenever you have February or January or Monday in the middle of a sentence, you wouldn't find it with a capital letter, unless the January, Monday, February is beginning a sentence. So janvier, January. Février, February. Mars, Avril, Mai, which is May, so Mai. Juin, Juillet, which is July. Août. So you sort of sound like an owl a little bit when you're saying it, so it's août. You can also pronounce it, you'll also hear the pronunciation août with the final T, août. but it's more of a formal thing. People, if they really want to be very formal or very fancy, and generally the older generation will say août, but most people nowadays would say août. Septembre, septembre. Octobre, octobre. Novembre, novembre. Décembre, décembre. So in summary, we have the seasons, which are le printemps, l'été, l'automne, et l'hiver. And the months, les mois, we have janvier, février, mars, avril, mai, juin, juillet, août or août, septembre, octobre, novembre, décembre. So that's all. Those are the months and those are the seasons. And then in the next video, we'll be talking about the days of the week and the format that the date should take. So, merci et à bientôt. Bonjour, mes amis. Today, what we're going to be talking about is the days of the week, or les jours de la semaine. So, let's get started. I would also like to point out that this is the full format of how a date should look. So, if you wanted to say Monday, April 6, 2015, this is how it would look. So one thing that I wanted to point out is that there are no commas. In English, we use a comma to separate the number of the day and the number of the year. But in French, they don't do that because the month is used to separate the day and the year. So we have lundi, le 6 avril 2015. 2015. And lundi is Monday. Mardi, le 7 avril 2015. Mardi is Tuesday. Mercredi, le 8 avril 2015. Mercredi, le 8 avril 2015. Mercredi is Wednesday. Jeudi, le 9 avril 2015. Jeudi, le 9 avril 2015. Vendredi, le 10 avril 2015. Vendredi, le 10 avril 2015, vendredi being Friday. Samedi, le 11 avril 2015. Samedi, le 11 avril 2015. And finally, dimanche, le 12 avril 2015. Dimanche, le 12 avril 2015. So, those are the days of the week. In summary, we have lundi, mardi, mercredi, jeudi, vendredi, samedi, et dimanche. It's also important to note that in the English calendar, at least in Canada and the United States, the calendar begins on a Sunday. However, the French calendar begins on a Monday, on lundi, and then ends on a Sunday, dimanche. So that's also an important difference. So to take from this video, remember the format of the date, no commas, no capitals for the months of the year or the days of the week, and the fact that the week starts with lundi. So that's all. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the discussion section that's next to the video here. Thank you. Merci. Bonjour, mes amis. In this video, we're going to be talking about how to count from 21 all the way to 100. So these numbers are going to be a bit easier than the ones we learned previously because, in a sense, it's just a bit of a repetition. So I'll go through the numbers first, and then afterwards I'll offer a bit of an explanation because some of the numbers in French are a bit different than you would expect them to be compared to English or Spanish or Italian or a lot of other languages, okay? So the word for 20 is 20. For 30, it's 30. For 40, we have 40. 50 is 50. 60 is 60. 70 is 70. 80 is 80. And then 90 is 90, and 100 is 100, okay? So you might be wondering about the 70, 80, and 90. So in French, they kind of think about the number 60 to 80 as one block of 20 numbers, and then from 80 to 100 as another block of 20 numbers. So it's a bit different than how we would think about it in English. So I'll get into that a bit more later. So starting with 20, basically all you have to do is just add the numbers 1 to 9 to the number 20. So we have 21. So we have 21. And just remember that with the first one, we always do 21, but then the other ones, it just goes 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, and then 30 would be 30. The same thing goes for 30. We say 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40. This rule is the same when we count with 40, 50, and then finally with 60. When we get to 70, rather than saying 70 et un, it just becomes a continuation of the numbers from 1 to 20. So we go from 68, 68, 69, 69, 70, 70, and then we say 71 for 71, 72 for 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, and then finally we get to 80, 80. So from 80 to 99, we say 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99 et 100.
Bonjour tout le monde. Hello everyone and welcome to today's vocabulary lesson. So I'm just going to go over quickly the vocabulary that you need to have learned by the end of this module. L'appartement, l'appartement. L'émission de télé, l'émission de télé. Le film, le film. Le poulet, le poulet. Le porc, le porc. Le bœuf, le bœuf. L'eau, l'eau. Le lait, le lait. Le pain, le pain. Les pâtes, les pâtes. Le poisson, le poisson. Le jus, le jus. L'orange, l'orange. La pomme, la pomme. La pomme de terre, la pomme de terre. Le sucre, le sucre. Le sel, le sel. Les céréales, les céréales. Les croustilles, les croustilles. Les frites, les frites. Le yaourt, le yaourt. Les carottes, les carottes. Les bleuets, les bleuets. Les fraises, les fraises. La laitue, la laitue. So that's all the vocabulary for this week, for this lesson. So we will see you in the next slideshow. Merci et au revoir. Bonjour. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about simple questions. In the coming section, we're going to be talking about different ways to make questions. So this is sort of the introduction to how to make those questions. So let's begin. So you can make a question with the word qui, which means who. So for example, qui est votre ami? Qui est votre ami? Who is your friend? Qui est le personnage dans le film? Who is the character in the movie? Quand, which means when. Quand. Quand est votre anniversaire? When is your birthday? Quand est votre anniversaire? And you'll notice that with quand, when it's quand by itself, the end is pronounced like a D sound, like a D. When quand comes before a vowel, such as in quand, the D changes to a T sound. So quand est votre anniversaire? Or quand est la fête? So when is the party? Quand est la fête? And then when it comes before a regular consonant, it'll be quand with the D sound again. Où?
which means where. Où. Où est le Canada? Where is Canada? Où est le supermarché? Où est le supermarché? Where is the supermarket? Qu'est-ce que? What is? Dot dot dot. So you have to fill in the dot dot dot. So for example, we have qu'est-ce qu'un chien? What's a dog? Qu'est-ce qu'une chaise? What's a chair? And you'll notice that this is slightly different from English because in this question there's actually no verb. So we have qu'est-ce que, which just means what usually, and then we have un chien, which is a dog. So literally we would have what a dog. So the verb is implied. So qu'est-ce qu'un chien, which would translate as what's a dog or what is a dog. So that's all that we have. So we have qui, quand, où, and qu'est-ce que, which are four very important ways to make very simple questions. So practice it and see what you come up with and then test it out and then move on to the next lesson where we'll be talking about yes or no questions. So we'll see you there. À bientôt. Salut! In this lesson, we're going to be talking about yes or no questions. So building off of the simple questions that we talked about in the last lesson. So one way to make yes or no questions in French is to use what we call est-ce que. So est-ce que, which sounds very, seems a little scary because there's a lot of letters and it seems very structured. It actually really isn't, and it's actually one of the easiest ways, in my opinion, to make a yes or no question because you really just have to copy and paste it into a sentence. So essentially what we do is we take est-ce que and then we add it to a sentence and then it becomes a yes or no question. So for example, in the sentence l'homme mange une pizza, so the man eats a pizza, if we add est-ce que to the front, then it becomes does the man eat a pizza? So est-ce que l'homme mange une pizza? Does the man eat a pizza? Which comes from l'homme mange une pizza, so the man eats a pizza, which is just a regular sentence. So est-ce que l'homme mange une pizza? Does the man eat a pizza? Est-ce que le médecin lit un livre? Does the doctor read a book? Another way that's a little bit more complicated to make a yes or no question is called inversion. So for example, we have our sentence, vous mangez une pizza, vous mangez une pizza, and then if you isolate your verb there, so we have manger, to eat is our main verb, and then we pick out who the person is doing the action. So we've identified here that it's vous, that vous is doing the action. And then what we do is we actually switch vous and the verb as it would appear in the regular sentence. So above we have vous mangez une pizza. In the question, we switch manger and vous. So it becomes vous mangez-vous une pizza. And then you add a little dash in between manger and vous to show that they're actually connected. So mangez-vous une pizza? Are you eating a pizza or do you eat a pizza? The next one is a regular sentence again. So l'homme mange un gâteau. And then what we do with this one, we isolate our verb, which is mange, and then we isolate the person who's doing the action, which is l'homme. And then what we have to do is we have to take l'homme and then we have to transform it into one of our subject pronouns. And a subject pronoun would be je, tu, il, elle, nous, vous, il with an S, elle with an S. So one of those words. And then what we would do is we would take the noun, so l'homme, comma, and the comma is optional. It's actually not common to see the comma in there, but I've put it in just for clarification. Then we would do the inversion with the je, tu, il, elle, nous, vous, the ones that I just talked about, with the verb, and we'll switch it. So for example, we have l'homme mange, il, un gâteau. Another thing, because mange ends in an E, and because il begins with an I, and they're both vowels, they conflict. So what we have to do is we add a T sound in there to sort of stop them and to separate them. So if we didn't, it would sound like this, manger le gâteau. So the mange and the il sort of come together a little bit more than we would want to, so we add a T. So it becomes l'homme mange-t-il un gâteau? L'homme mange-t-il un gâteau? So I know this is a little complicated. Practice it. With the inversion, it's mostly used in formal contexts, so you don't have to worry about too much about mastering this one because the most common one to see is est-ce que. Unfortunately, est-ce que is just sort of a copy and paste like we just talked about. Another way is if you take a sentence and then you just add the words n'est-ce pas or non at the end. So for example, tu aimes les chiens, n'est-ce pas? So you like dogs, don't you? A Canadian thing that we do here in Canada is we just add a to the end. So you like dogs, eh? And there's other equivalents around the world as well in English that do that. So, but here we have tu aimes les chiens, n'est-ce pas? or tu aimes les chiens, non? So get either n'est-ce pas or non at the end. And then finally, we have intonation, just like we do in English. So for example, la mère a trois enfants. The mother has 3 kids. So you sort of raise your voice at the end to notify that it's a question. So l'homme a 4 sœurs. The man has 4 sisters. So those are the 4 different ways to make yes or no questions. So we'll talk about now how to answer those questions. So the response is oui, which is yes, no, which is no, and make sure you add the very faint N sound at the end. So it's not no like we have in English, it's no, no. And then finally we have the word sí, which is different from the sí that you would hear in Spanish or Italian. So this sí is a positive response to a negative question. And so what that looks like is, if you look at the bottom here, we have est-ce que tu n'aimes pas les frites? So the translation would be, you don't like fries? So someone assuming something in a negative way and asking it in a question with don't or not. And then the person would correct them. In English, we could either say, yes, I do like fries, so you're wrong, or I can say, no, I do like fries, as a no, that statement is incorrect. I'm correcting you. So in French, we would say, si j'aime les frites. Si j'aime les frites. So that's all for today's lesson. So just remember the 4 different ways to make a yes or no question, and then the 3 different ways to respond to them. So oui, non, et si. So that's all. Merci. And then in the next lesson, we'll be talking about more complex questions, and then that'll be it for questions. So, merci. Salut! Welcome to the next video, and in this video we're going to be talking about how to respond to yes or no questions. So naturally, the different types of answers you will get with a yes or no question are yes and no. So this video is going to be pretty quick. So in French, the word for yes is oui. Repeat after me, oui. Sometimes you'll hear French people saying ouais, which is kind of the equivalent to saying yeah in English as opposed to yes. The word for no in French is non. So this word is a bit different than the English word. So we say no in English, but non in French. So hear that faint N sound, non, at the end of the word. A third word that we have in French, which we don't use in English, is if you're asking a negative question. So for instance, est-ce que tu n'es pas Canadien? Are you not Canadian? If you're asking a question which is already negative, you can reply with non, je ne suis pas Canadien. No, I'm not Canadian. Or si je suis Canadien. So yes, correcting the negative question. So we say si je suis Canadien or non, je ne suis pas Canadien to a negative question. If it was est-ce que tu es Canadien? It's a normal positive or affirmative question. We would say oui, je suis Canadien or non, je ne suis pas Canadien. Another word that's useful too when replying to questions is peut-être, and this means maybe, peut-être. So those are different ways that you can use to apply to a yes or no question. So we'll see you in the next video. Au revoir. Bonjour à tous, bonjour à toutes, and welcome to the final lesson of how to make questions. So these ones will deal with more complex questions. So what's the difference between complex questions and simple questions? So complex questions are the ones in the top left corner there. So for example, who is he, or where is the store? So generally, simple questions will have is in it, and then they'll usually be very short. And then if we look at the bottom, we'll see complex questions. So complex questions usually have your question word. It'll have is. It'll have a he, she, you, it, Charlie, Sophie, someone. And then it'll have another verb after it. And then you can do the same thing with does. So for example, who is he talking to? Or where is he going? So those are complex questions, whereas who is he and where is the store are simple questions, which was what we talked about in the first lesson of the question section. So what does this look like? So simple questions, as I said, are usually the question word plus is and then the rest of the question. Complex questions, however, are the question word, either is or does, plus he, she, you, we, it, etc., plus another verb. So for example, where is she going tomorrow, for example? So that would be an example of a complex question. So in French, what this looks like is we would either use est-ce que or inversion. So we would have our question word, and then instead of using is or does, we add est-ce que,
And then we continue on, so we would have il, elle, tu, or like he, she, it, just as we do in English, and then we would continue with our verb and then the rest of our question. With the inversion, what we do is we have our question word, and then we'll invert the second verb and the he, she, you, etc. So for example, if I wanted to say, where is she going tomorrow? I could say, where goes she tomorrow? It's not really something you could say in English, but in French, that's how it would sound if you were to directly translate it. So let's dive into that a little bit more. And I'm going to use mostly est que in these examples just because est que is the most common and the one that you would mostly come across. So here we have, qui est-ce que tu vois au parc? Who do you see at the park? À qui parles-tu? Who are you speaking to? So with qui, we have the option of doing à qui, which is to whom, or de qui, which is from whom. And then this is, unlike in English, this is required. You can't say, in English we could say, who are you speaking to? We can't do this in French. We have to say, to whom are you speaking? So you have to really change that. But we'll talk more about this in the next course. Quand est-ce que tu regardes le film? When do you watch the movie? Quand est-ce qu'il mange la pizza? Quand est-ce qu'il mange la pizza? When is he eating the pizza? Où, and then sort of the same thing as we had with qui, we can say d'où, which is from where. Où est-ce que tu vois la fille? Où est-ce que tu vois la fille? Where do you see the girl? D'où viens-tu? D'où viens-tu? Where do you come from? Pourquoi? Why? Pourquoi est-ce que tu choisis un Coke? Pourquoi est-ce que tu choisis un Coke? Why do you choose a Coke? Pourquoi est-ce qu'il chante? Why is he singing? The next one is comment, which is how. Comment allez-vous? How are you doing? Comment vous appelez-vous? What's your name? And both of these questions you may have already seen before. Combien de, which is how much or how many. Combien de chiens as-tu? How many dogs do you have? Combien de chiens as-tu? J'ai 3 chiens. Combien? I have 3 dogs. How many? So you always have to say combien de when you're doing sort of a regular question. However, if you're actually just to say how much, and that's the end of your question, or how many, and that's the end of your question, then you can just say combien, and then just leave it at that. And then finally we have what, and what is a little complicated in French. So when we're talking about what in a general sense, and I'll explain a little bit more about this in a second, we would use que or quoi. So que is just when it's what by itself. However, quoi is with prepositions. So we can say à quoi, so to what, or de quoi, from what, or about what, or of what, etc. So for example, qu'est-ce que tu vois? What do you see? Or we can also say de quoi parlez-vous? What are you talking about? Or about what are you talking? And then we have a more specific what. So whenever you can equate what with the word which, then we use quel. Whenever you can't, then we use que. So for example, I could say what is she doing, but I can't say which is she doing. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So if I say what is she doing, then it has to be que because I can't say which is she doing. However, if I can say what glass did you choose, and I can also say which glass did you choose, and they're both more or less the same and they both sound okay in English, then I can use quel. Okay, so here we have quel est votre métier? What is your profession, or which is your profession? Quelle pizza est-ce que vous préférez? Which or what pizza do you prefer? So there you have it. There's our question words there. So we have qui, which is who. We have what, which is que, quel, or quoi. When, which is quand. Why, pourquoi. How, which is comment. Combien de, which is how many. And that's it. And then so just review these 3 lessons when you want to learn more about asking questions and how to answer them. So these are the basics and the essentials that you'll need in order to formulate a good variety of questions. So if you do have any questions about the questions that we talked about, feel free to post them in the discussion section. Merci.
Bonjour tout le monde. Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's vocabulary lesson. We're going to be focusing a little bit more on the travel side, so you can learn a little bit more of the travel vocabulary. So let's begin. Souvent. souvent. Now you'll notice that this word ends in ENT, and before you were told never to pronounce the ENTs, this word is one of the few exceptions where you would pronounce the final ENT of the word. Souvent. Souvent. Autre. Autre. Surtout. Surtout. L'heure de. L'heure de. Le vol. Le vol. L'avion. L'avion. L'autobus. L'autobus. Les transports en commun. Les transports en commun. Le train. Le train. Marcher. Marcher. Courir. Courir. Chemin de fer. Chemin de fer. L'aéroport. L'aéroport. La gare. La gare. La voiture. La voiture. Le billet. Le billet. Le conducteur. Le conducteur. Partir. Arriver. Arriver. Voyager. Voyager. La roue. La roue. Le permis de conduire. Le permis de conduire. Le passeport. Le passeport. L'horloge. L'horloge. Et le prix. Le prix. So that's all, and merci et au revoir.
Bonjour tout le monde. Hello everyone. Today we're going to be talking about negation. So what negation is when you're, instead of saying I am eating a sandwich, you would say I am not eating a sandwich. So it's that magical not word. So in French there's a pretty easy way to say not. So we use the expression ne pas. So what we do here is, let's take the example of je ne regarde pas la télévision. So in the regular sentence, je regarde la télévision, so I watch TV, and we want to make it into I don't watch TV, we'd say je ne regarde pas la télévision. So we add ne and pas, and we put it around the regular, the verb, just sort of like a sandwich, sort of like brackets. So instead of saying je regarde la télévision, we put ne before regarde and then pas after regarde. So je ne regarde pas la télévision. Similarly, we have tu ne parles pas à Sophie. Tu ne parles pas à Sophie. You don't speak to Sophie. Also, it's important to note that whenever ne comes before a vowel, such as A, E, I, O, or U, or H, or Y, then the N loses its E and you have a little apostrophe on there. So this is common in French, and we'll come across it more in the coming lessons. So again, je ne regarde pas la télévision. Tu ne parles pas à Sophie. So that's their equivalent of don't or not. Another thing that I wanted to talk about today is the expression ne pas de. So if you want to say I don't have any, or I don't have any of something, or I have none of something, then we would say pas de. So for an example is she doesn't have any dogs. We could say elle n'a pas de chien. She doesn't have any dogs. And this is different from saying, if I was to say elle n'a pas du chien, or no, and a better example would be elle n'a pas de la pizza. She doesn't have the pizza. If I was to say elle n'a pas d'une pizza, that would mean she doesn't have one pizza. If I was to say elle n'a pas de pizza, just as we're talking about here, that means that she doesn't have any pizza. So this is the most common one you'll come across, is the pas de. So another example is nous ne mangeons pas de pizza. So we don't eat any pizza. Okay, so here we've learned about the ne pas, which just means don't or not. And then we also learned about the ne pas de, which means I don't have any or not any. Okay, so if you have any questions, please feel free to let me know and I'll help you with those. And then one last point before we go. Vous ne devez pas oublier de continuer à étudier. So what this means is you must not forget to continue to study. So just a quick little anecdote there using our ne pas that we just talked about. So again, any questions, let me know and I'll help you out. Merci.
Bonjour, salut, hello everyone, and welcome to this week's vocabulary lesson. This week we'll be focusing on ER verbs, which coincides with the ER conjugations that we'll be learning later on. Regarder, regarder. Manger, manger. Commencer, commencer. Visiter, visiter. Donner, donner. Demander, demander. Danser, danser. Arriver, arriver. Aimer, aimer. Étudier, étudier. Écouter, écouter. Travailler, travailler. Voyager, voyager. Trouver, trouver. Penser, penser. Passer, passer. Parler, parler. Fermer, fermer. Nager, nager. Laver, laver. Jouer, jouer. Téléphoner, téléphoner. Présenter, présenter. Rencontrer, rencontrer. Montrer, montrer. That's all for today. Merci et au revoir.
Salut à tous, salut à toutes. Today we're going to be talking about verbs in French. So just look at these sentences right here. I ate steak, I'm eating steak, and I will eat steak. So think about these sentences and what do you notice? You'll notice that each talks about a different period of time. So I ate steak happened in the past. I'm eating steak is happening in the present right now. I will eat steak is happening maybe tomorrow, maybe the next day, but in the future. So verbs change, even in English, depending on the subject, which is the person who's doing the action, and the time the action took place. So whether it's in the present, the past, or the future. So in English, we're talking about the present today. In English, there's 3 present tenses. So 3 ways to change the verb to fit different aspects of the present. However, in French, it only has 1, which makes it a little bit easier on French learners. Not so much on English learners, but definitely on French learners. So for example, we have I eat chicken, I'm eating chicken, and I do eat chicken. But in French, it would just be je mange le poulet for all 3 of them.
One difficulty with that is that it makes sentences for English speakers a little bit more confusing, but there are ways to specify what you're talking about. But for the most part, you'll just use that one French form. So in infinitive, so we have the infinitive parler, and then we also have the English equivalent, the English infinitive to speak. So what an infinitive is, it's a neutral verb. There's no specified time frame, so there's no past, present, or future, and there's no specified speaker. So it's just sort of sitting in limbo, waiting to be fit into a specific time and with a specific person. It's the most basic form of a verb. So in English, you'll always see infinitives with the verb or with to before it. So to speak, to listen, to read. However, in French, the infinitive will always be followed by er, ir, or re, which are considered the three types of verbs. So as I said, there's er, an example is parler. There's ir, an example would be avoir, which you've already learned, and then there's re, which is être, which you have already learned as well. So verbs are sorted into those three categories based on their endings. Each of the three groups, the er, ir, and re verbs, have their own conjugation patterns. And of course, there are irregular verbs like avoir and être that we've already learned that don't follow these patterns and that you'll need to learn separately. So that's all for today, and thank you for listening, and we will see you tomorrow. Au revoir. Salut, and welcome to day 13 of the 100-Day French Challenge. Today we're going to be talking about ER verbs in the present. So as you've learned before, there's three groups of verbs. We have the ER verbs, the IR verbs, and the RE verbs. This is the first group of verbs that we'll be learning, the ER verbs. So the ER endings. So how do you conjugate ER verbs? So what you need to do is you need to remove the ER from the stem. So for example, if we use parler, the infinitive parler, then we need to remove the ER and then add the following endings. So for je, we add an E. For tu, we add an ES. Il, we add an E. Elle, we add an E. Nu, we add an ONS. Vous, we add an EZ. Il, we add an ENT. And then elle, we add an ENT. Now let's look at some examples. So for example, je parle, tu parles, il parle, elle parle, nous parlons, vous parlez, il parle, elle parle. You'll notice that the last two, the il with an S and the l with an S, the ENT is never pronounced in French. There's only one word in French where you would pronounce the ENT, that is used frequently at least, and that is not a verb. So whenever it's a verb and there's an ENT, never ever pronounce it. Another example is habiter. So we have j'habite. You'll notice that it's apostrophe, it's contracted. So je plus a vowel is J apostrophe. J'habite. Tu habites. Il habite. Elle habite. Nous habitons. Vous habitez. Ils habitent. Elles habitent. Habiter, because H is most of the time a vowel in French. You'll notice that we have a lot of the Z sound going on that I was talking about earlier. So make sure you make the Z, the Z in between the nous, vous, ils, elles, because H is considered to be a vowel in this case. So of course there's exceptions to the pattern. That's always fun. So two notable exceptions are manger and commencer. So for manger, it's the same pattern. So je mange, tu manges, il mange, elle mange. But when we get to nous, if you were to follow the steps that I gave you at the beginning, you would develop nous mangeons. But because you want to maintain that je sound that's in the other types of verbs for manger, we have to add an e because the G just in front of the O makes a g sound. So we add an e to make it a soft, like the same soft sound. So je mange, tu manges, il mange, elle mange, nous mangeons, as opposed to nous mangeons. Vous mangez, il mange, elle mange. So that E just adds more continuity throughout the verb pattern. And then we have commencer, which has a similar issue. If we look at the new form, we can see that following the steps that I gave you before, we put the C right in front of an O, which would be commencons, which doesn't sound very nice, and it doesn't follow the other sound patterns as the other verbs. So what we do is we add that special C, the CD with the little squiggle at the bottom, and what that does is it makes the C sound soft. So just as if it was coming before an I or an E. So now it's nous commençons as opposed to nous commençons. So je commence, tu commences, il commence, elle commence, nous commençons, vous commencez, il commence, elle commence. So it's just to maintain that sound pattern. So that's all for today, and I hope you have a great day. Salut et merci.
Bonjour à tous, bonjour à toutes, and welcome to today's lesson. Today we're going to be talking about IR verbs in the present. So you'll recall that before we learned about the ER verbs, and then we also learned that all verbs in the infinitive form, of course, end in ER, IR, or RE. So this is talking about the second group, the IR verbs, which is the second largest group. So in terms of endings, you'll see the endings listed here below. So relatively different than the ER verbs. So just a couple of examples. We have the verb finir, to finish. Je finis, tu finis, il finit, elle finit, nous finissons, vous finissez, ils finissent, elles finissent. So you'll notice that for the il and the elle with an S, you don't pronounce the ENT. You still don't pronounce it, but make sure that you emphasize on the is. Finissent. Whereas you would say je finis, tu finis, ils finissent, elles finissent. And then another example is obéir, to obey. J'obéis, tu obéis, il obéit, elle obéit, nous obéissons, vous obéissez, ils obéissent, elles obéissent. So of course there's some exceptions to the pattern. Just a couple are partir, je pars, tu pars, il part, elle part, nous partons, vous partez, ils partent, elles partent. So you'll notice that partir is entirely irregular, and partir means to leave, like to depart. And then we have sortir, which also means to leave, but more so exit, like exit a building, whereas partir is like leave the house, like leave for a flight type thing. Je sors, tu sors, il sort, elle sort, nous sortons, vous sortez, ils sortent, elles sortent. So you'll notice that it's very similar to partir, and you'll also notice that dormir is also similar to sortir et partir. So dormir means to sleep, of course. Je dors, tu dors, il dort, elle dort, nous dormons, vous dormez, ils dorment, elles dorment. So that's all for today. Those are the top 3 IR irregular verbs. So I hope that was helpful, and we will see you tomorrow. Au revoir. Salut aux étudiants et aux étudiantes. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about expressions with avoir, or les expressions avec avoir. Many of these expressions, you'll realize, are usually in English, we would use is, the verb is, or to be. So for example, one that we'll come across is to be hot. So if I was to say I am hot, meaning that I feel very warm in a certain situation, or like a room or something like that, we would use the verb is or am or be. However, in French, they use the verb avoir. This is because it's a different way of thinking, and it's a change of the way that they think. So in English, we have it as sort of a feeling. So the feeling of being really warm, we see as a feeling, as a quality of our experience. However, in French, the way that their language portrays it is that it's a quality that they have, that they possess, that they hold. So that's where that differs. So in French, for these expressions that we're going to talk about today, they use avoir. But in English, for the most part, we would use the verb to be, or is, am, etc. So let's get started. So the first expression is avoir besoin de. So for example, j'ai besoin d'une tasse, or I need a cup. So avoir besoin de. And it's important to note that de will always be de. It never changes to du. It never changes to de, which we will talk about in the level 2 course. Avoir faim. Avez-vous faim? Are you hungry? And this one, make sure that you're pronouncing faim, F-A-I-M, like faim, and not like femme or femme, because femme is the word for woman. So just careful with that one. So it should be pronounced faim. So sort of like an F-A-Y sort of sound, faim. Avoir faim. So that's to be hungry. Avoir soif. Avoir soif.
Il a soif, he's thirsty, so to be thirsty. Avoir chaud, avoir chaud. Il a chaud dans la salle de classe, he's hot in the classroom. Avoir chaud, to be hot. Avoir froid, avoir froid. D'habitude, elle a froid en hiver. Usually, she's cold in winter. Avoir froid, to be cold, to be cold. Avoir raison, nous avons raison. We are right. Avoir raison, to be right. Avoir tort, without pronouncing the second T, tort. Non, tu as tort. No, you are wrong. Avoir tort, to be wrong. Avoir sommeil, ils ont sommeil. They are sleepy. Avoir sommeil, to be sleepy. Avoir la gueule de bois, avoir la gueule de bois. Après la nuit passée, il a la gueule de bois. After last night, he's hungover. Avoir la gueule de bois, to be hungover. Avoir peur de, elle a peur d'un chat. She's scared of a cat. Avoir peur de, to be scared, or to be afraid of. And then finally, il y a. Il y a. Il y a 3 tasses sur la table. There are 3 cups on the table. Il y a, which can either mean there is or there are. In French, there's no distinction. Il y a. So it's all try and memorize and practice using those expressions because they are very important, and you'll hear them pretty often in the French language. So try it out. If you have any questions, comments, or would have a question or you would like me to look over your work, feel free to post them in the discussion section, and I'll give you some feedback. Merci.
Bonjour tout le monde. Aujourd'hui, nous allons parler du futur proche. So, hello everyone. Today we're going to be talking about le futur proche, or the near future. So, what's going to happen in the future? So, le futur proche, the near future, is formed with the verb aller, which means to go. So, the conjugations are as follows: Je vais, tu vas, il va, elle va. Nous allons, vous allez, ils vont, elles vont. So aller can be used as a standalone verb. For example, I go to the market, which we will see right now. So for example, tu vas à la bibliothèque. You are going to the library. Nous allons au magasin. We're going to the store. Fred et Georges vont à l'école. Fred and George go to school. Are going to go to school. So, le futur proche, which is translated as the near future. And some examples in English are, I'm going to read tomorrow, he's going to study tomorrow, they are going to clean it. So, the futur proche, the near future, is always formed with that going, which is aller in French. So, you can see here that il va parler is an example of the futur proche. So, you have the subject, the verb, and the infinitive. Il va parler. Je vais étudier. So how do you form it? So you conjugate aller in the present tense, so the je vais, tu vas, il va, etc., etc., and then you add the infinitive after aller. So some examples are je vais regarder la télévision, tu vas manger bientôt, il va étudier espagnol, elle va lire un livre. So, futur proche, thankfully, is one of the easiest verb tenses that you will have to learn in French. There's absolutely no irregularities, there's no exceptions, and if you know aller, then you can easily know how to use le futur proche. So, I would encourage you to practice, and that's all for today. So, hope you enjoyed today's lesson, and merci beaucoup. Au revoir. Bonjour, salut. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about 25 pays en français, so 25 countries in French. So let's get started. So as we mentioned at the beginning of the course, all countries in French, well actually most countries in French have a gender, and most countries in French also have an article. So how do we tell which ones are feminine and which ones are masculine? So personally, for me, I find that this is the easiest grammar rule in terms of differentiating between what's feminine and what's masculine, because it's quite straightforward as opposed to regular nouns, which are very sort of up in the air and you have to learn them as you go along. So with countries, usually about 95% of the time, if the country or the region or the province or state or whatever ends in an E, then it's feminine. If it doesn't end in an E, then it's masculine.
However, there's some countries that are plural, and usually they're plural in English as well. So, for example, the United States, plural, the Netherlands, plural, the United Arab Emirates, plural again. So if it's plural in English, then it's also plural in French as well. There's a couple of exceptions, which is why I said 95% of the time this rule makes sense. So the exceptions are le Cambodge, so although it ends in an E, it's masculine, le Mexique, and le Mozambique. Those are a couple of the main exceptions. There's a couple more, but those are the main exceptions. So let's get started. So these are 25 countries, ones that you generally hear people talk about the most, at least in Canada, in terms of the regions that we generally travel to. And then also I've added in some countries that are very francophone as well, from different regions. So we have le Canada, Canada, la France, France, les États-Unis, the United States, l'Allemagne, this is Germany, l'Allemagne, l'Australie, Australia, le Japon, Japan, la Chine, China, la Corée du Sud, South Korea, l'Argentine, Argentina, l'Espagne, Spain, le Mexique, Mexico, l'Inde, India, l'Angleterre, which is England, la Bretagne, which is Britain, le Royaume-Uni, which is the United Kingdom, le Portugal, which is Portugal, l'Italie, which is Italy, la Russie, which is Russia, la Belgique, which is Belgium, la Suisse, Switzerland, la Nouvelle-Zélande, New Zealand, la Grèce, Greece, l'Afrique du Sud, or South Africa, les Pays-Bas, which is literally the lowlands, but in English the word would be the Netherlands, le Québec, and now I know this isn't a country, but it's definitely an important part of Canada's French community and French region, so le Québec, l'Haïti, Haiti, and finally, la Centrafrique, which in English is the Central African Republic. So I personally prefer the name La Centrafrique because it's quicker to say, but in English it would be Central African Republic. In French, La Centrafrique. So that's all. Those are 25 countries in French. Most countries will have a French equivalent. So if there's a country that I didn't talk about, look it up in the dictionary and see how it differs from the English version. So that's all. À bientôt. Merci. Bonjour tout le monde. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about traveling in French, or voyager en français. So how do we indicate direction? One point that's pretty challenging for French learners is that when we say, in English, we say, I'm going to France, and it's just the one word, it's just to. However, in French, we have a variety of different words that we would use. So to France is actually a little bit more complicated than it would be in English. So when we say to or in a country or a region, we would say either au, en, or au. So looking here, so remembering what we talked about in the last video about masculine countries. So with masculine countries, we use au, so au. So for example, au Canada, au Japon. So this would just mean to Canada or to Japan, in Japan. With feminine countries, or
any country that begins with a vowel. So here we have en Chine, which is a feminine country, so to China or in China. And then we have Angola, which is a masculine country because it doesn't end in an A, we know that, or because it doesn't end in an E, we know that. But because it begins with a vowel, we use en. So en Angola, in Angola. Finally, with plural countries, we use AUX, which is pronounced as O, but when it comes before a vowel, you make the Z sound. So here we have aux États-Unis, but remembering back to the word for the Netherlands, we would say aux Pays-Bas. Okay, so that would mean to the United States or in the United States or to the Netherlands or in the Netherlands. When talking about coming from places, it's sort of a very similar structure. So going back to the gender, when you have masculine countries, you use the word du. So for example, du Canada, du Japon. So from Canada or from Japan. With feminine countries, we use de. So we would say de Chine ou d'Amérique. De Chine ou d'Amérique. So from China or from America. And then finally, with plural countries, we use de. And the S makes a Z sound when it comes before vowels, just as the O with the X. So des États-Unis, or des Pays-Bas, so from the United States or from the Netherlands. With cities, however, cities generally, for the most part, I'd say about like 95% of the time, cities have no gender, which makes it a little bit easier. So we would just use a when going to a city or being in a city, and we use de when coming from a city. So for example, je vais à Toronto. Je vais à Toronto, so I go to Toronto. So no O, just a. Elle vient de Paris. Elle vient de Paris. She comes from Paris, so just de. Similar rules also apply to islands. So if it's a single island and not an island nation, if it's an island nation, generally we apply the rules that we learned for countries and regions. If it's an island, just sort of like a standalone island, we would generally follow these rules. So if it's a single island, we would use a, much like we would for a city, so they aren't really considered to have a gender. So for example, elle va à Saint-Martin. Elle va à Saint-Martin, so she goes to Saint Martin. Il vient de Saint-Martin. Il vient de Saint-Martin, so he comes from Saint Martin. If it's a plural island or sort of like an island group, we would do O, sort of like a plural country, so O with an X or D. So elle va aux îles Marshall. Elle va aux îles Marshall, so she goes to the Marshall Islands. Similarly with from, we would say il vient des îles Marshall. Il vient des îles Marshall. And there you have it. So those are the rules for islands, island groups, cities, and then states, provinces, regions, countries, whatever other regions we have there. So follow the rules and try and test it out to see if you encounter any problems or difficulties, questions, and if so, let me know in the comments, and I'd be happy to help you with those. Merci.
Bonjour tout le monde. Hello everyone. This week's vocabulary will focus on different time expressions and different ways to express the weather, which will coincide with this week's lesson. So let's begin. Demain, demain. Après-demain, après-demain. Lendemain, lendemain. Hier, hier. Avant-hier, avant-hier. Aujourd'hui, aujourd'hui. La veille, la veille. Maintenant, maintenant. La semaine passée, la semaine passée. La semaine prochaine, la semaine prochaine. Midi, midi. Minuit, minuit. Chaude, chaude.
froide, froide. Le temps, le temps. Nuageux, nuageux. Orageux, orageux. Du soleil, du soleil. Du vent, du vent. Du brouillard, du brouillard. Pleuvoir, pleuvoir. Neiger, neiger. Geler, geler. La parapluie, la parapluie. La neige, la neige. La pluie, la pluie. So that's all for this week's vocabulary. Merci et au revoir.
Salut, salut. And today we're going to be talking about important irregular French verbs, which is part of the 100-day French challenge. So the verbs that we're going to be covering today are dire, which means to say, to tell, voir, which means to see, savoir, which means to know, faire, which means to do or to make, and then falloir, which means to be necessary. So dire is conjugated in this way. Unfortunately, as you can see, all of these will be irregular. So I'll just read out the conjugations and then try and take some notes. And then if you need to review it again, just watch the video again to take down the conjugations. So je dis, tu dis, il dit, elle dit, nous disons, vous dites, ils disent, elles disent. You'll notice the first four, je, tu, il, elle, all have the same pronunciation. You'll notice that this is quite common for a lot of French verbs. Yeah, with I think a good portion of French verbs, the first four pronunciations will be the same. Voir, je vois, tu vois, il voit, elle voit, nous voyons, vous voyez, il voit, elle voit. You'll also notice that frequently the je, tu, il, elle, and then the il, elle with an S will also be the same pronunciation. Savoir, je sais, tu sais, il sait, elle sait, nous savons, vous savez, ils savent, elles savent. Also notice that the ENT isn't pronounced on either of the il with an S or the l with an S. Never ever in French is the ENT pronounced in a verb. There's only one word in French that uses the ENT that you would use frequently, where you would pronounce it, but that's not a verb. Faire, je fais, tu fais, il fait, elle fait, nous faisons, vous faites, ils font, elles font. Now, falloir is definitely an interesting verb. It's only ever conjugated with il, so there's no je, there's no nous, there's no vous. It's just il, and it means it is necessary. So il faut would be translated as it is necessary to do something, and it's always followed by an infinitive, which we've talked about before. So, for example, il faut manger. It's necessary to eat. You can also say il faut étudier. It's necessary to study. So all you have to remember is il faut, and then just remember to add a verb following faut. And it's a very common expression used in French. Bonne journée et au revoir. Merci. Bonjour tout le monde. Today we're going to be talking about 3 really important verbs. So those verbs in English are I can, I want, and I must. So these verbs, even in English, are always followed by a second verb. So in which case you would have 2 verbs in one sentence. So, for example, je peux aller au magasin. I can go to the store. Je peux te donner le cadeau. I can give you the present. Je ne peux pas regarder la télévision. I can't watch the TV. As opposed to the first example, which just has one verb. J'aime les chiens. Tu regardes la télévision. So just the one verb in those two sentences. So pouvoir. Pouvoir means to can or to be able to. So for example, je peux aller au cinéma. I can go to the theater. Nous pouvons acheter ce pull. So you'll notice that the pouvoir is always followed by an infinitive. So je peux aller. I can go. So just remember to always add the infinitive after. Otherwise, you're just saying I can to the cinema. So the conjugations are je peux, tu peux, il peut, elle peut, nous pouvons, vous pouvez, ils peuvent, elles peuvent. Next is vouloir, which means to want to. So you have je veux, tu veux, il veut, elle veut, nous voulons, vous voulez, ils veulent, elles veulent. And then some examples are je veux regarder la télévision, elle veut chanter. So same thing, veut is always followed by an infinitive. Otherwise, you're just saying I want TV, or I want sing, or I want. She wants this would be the second one because it doesn't have an infinitive. The next one is devoir, so to must or to have to. Je dois, tu dois, il doit, elle doit, nous devons, vous devez, ils doivent, elles doivent. Il doit faire ses devoirs. He has to do his homework. Vous devez travailler demain. You have to work tomorrow. Also notice the difference between the two English verbs for have. So devoir is to have to, like an obligation, you must, whereas avoir is to have something. So avoir is like a possession, whereas devoir is a duty or a requirement of some type. So vouloir, devoir, and pouvoir in time. So they can be used in any of the tenses. Of the two tenses that we've learned, well, three tenses that we've learned so far, you'll see je viens de pouvoir lui dire quelque chose. I was just able to tell him something. Tu vas devoir le lui dire. You're going to have to tell him. So very, very straightforward. So you just treat it as any regular verb. Just remember to place that second verb behind it. Au revoir, merci. Bonjour tout le monde. Hello everyone. Today we're going to be talking about RE verbs in the present. So this is the final group of the regular verbs. So we learned about the ER verbs, the IR verbs, and now we're finally going to learn about the RE verbs. Fortunately, the RE verbs are very similar to the ER verbs. So except for the first four conjugations. So for the first two, you just add an S. The second two, il and elle, you don't add anything, so you just take off the re, and then you're good to go. And then for the nous, vous, il with an S, and then elle with an S, it's identical to that of the ER verbs. So I'll just give you a couple of examples here. Vendre, which means to sell. Je vende, tu vendes, ils vendent, elles vendent, nous vendons, vous vendez, ils vendent, and elles vendent. And then we have répondre, to respond. Je réponds, tu réponds, ils répondent, elles répondent, nous répondons, vous répondez, ils répondent, elles répondent. And now some exceptions to the pattern. Of course there's exceptions. So we have verbs like prendre or verbs that are similar to prendre, like comprendre or surprendre. Je prends, tu prends, il prend, elles prend are all the same. They're all regular. Whereas the next four are irregular, so those ones you have to look out for. We have nous prenons, vous prenez, ils prennent, elles prennent. So the first two you're just taking out the D, and the second two you're taking out the D and adding an extra N. And then for mettre, again with it would be similar to promettre, so it's very similar. So je mets, tu mets, both regular, and then we have il met, and then elle met. So the only difference with these ones is that there's not a double T like it should be. Actually, sorry, the first four are irregular because it should, if you're following the rules, should have two T's. But in this case, it makes more sense just to have one. So je, tu, il, elle are all irregular, whereas nous, vous, il, elle are all regular. So nous mettons, vous mettez, il met, elle met. And then finally we have lire, which is entirely irregular. It's very similar to the verb dire, which you have already learned about. So je lis, tu lis, il lit, elle lit, nous lisons, vous lisez, ils lisent, elles lisent. So that's all for today. Sais-tu? Nous avons terminé la leçon d'aujourd'hui. So we finished the lesson today. Merci et au revoir. Bonjour tout le monde et bienvenue à cette leçon. So in French, they actually use the same word for this and that, whereas in English we specify. So the four words that they use are ce, cette, and c'est. And they agree in gender and number, which is why there's four of them. So ce is used for masculine and singular, like comes before masculine singular nouns. So for example, ce chien, ce divan. Set with the one T is the same thing as ce, so it's used for masculine singular nouns, but it's used for masculine singular nouns that begin with a vowel. So for example, cet homme, cet oeil. Also remember that H is most of the time a vowel in French. And then we also have cette, which is comes before feminine singular nouns. So we have cette table, cette télévision. And then finally we have c'est, which is used for all plurals. So for example, ces chiens and ces tables. So why do they use just one word? Well, if you think about it, in English we don't use this and that in the same sentence very often. We'll either just say this, and then we'll either just say that. In some cases, though, you will need to specify. So for example, do you want this or do you want that? Whereas before, you might say, oh, this is my glass. Or you might say, I'm watching that television. So you're just specifying between different things and not necessarily between distances of things. But sometimes, as I said, you will need to do that between, do you want this glass or that glass, or this TV and that TV? So in order to differentiate in French, you have to add these little tiny words at the end of the nouns. So if you add si after the word, it would mean this. So ce chien ci, this dog here. Or you can add la for something that's like further for that. Ce chien là, that dog there. So si and then la are only used for emphasis and not used all the time. So they're not super common, but you might see them. But it's good for emphasizing between two different things. So just some examples. Tu aimes ce chien-ci ou ce chien-là? Do you like this dog or that dog? Je mange ce sandwich. I eat this or that sandwich. It doesn't really matter. Elle regarde cette télévision. She watches this or that television. So it doesn't matter again. Nous choisissons ce cours. We choose this or that course. Again, it doesn't matter. Just they're specifying that it's this or that specific course. So that's all for today. Merci et au revoir. À bientôt. Bonjour tout le monde. Today we're going to be talking about my, your, our, his, her, and their, which are commonly known as possessive adjectives. So possessive adjectives are used to show possession of a noun, so a person, place, or thing. So for example, my hair, my glass, your TV, my computer, his phone, his eyes, etc., etc., etc. So in English, we use my, your, his, her, its, our, and their to express possession. In French, these forms must agree with gender and plurality of the noun, as is common with everything else that we've learned. So as such, each possessive adjective in French has a masculine, feminine, singular, plural form. So I have just listed here the possessive adjectives, and I'll just go through them just so that you know how they're pronounced. So mon, ma, mes, ton, ta, tes, son, sa, ses, notre, nos, votre, vos, leur. And it's also important to note that although you would use ma in front of feminine singular nouns, if any feminine singular noun begins with a vowel, then you have to use mon, ton, son, notre, mon, ton, or son, just to get that sound, because all three of those end in an N as opposed to ma, ta, sa, which end in an A. So it's just to add that extra level of fluidity to the sentence. So what if I want to specify between his and her? So as we just learned, son can mean his or her, but for masculine nouns, and sa can mean his or her for feminine nouns. So in order to specify between the two, you can add à lui at the end to specify his. So sa télévision à lui, his television, à elle, and then add à elle to the end of the word to specify her. So son divan à elle, so her couch. So again, you only use this to specify. You don't use it very often. It's only if you're asking whose couch is it? Is it hers or is it his? And you would say it's his. Outside of the adjectives that we just learned, you can also express possession in other ways. So for example, if you wanted to say Sally's TV, you would say la télévision de Sally, la chaise de Marc, le divan de Paul, le magasin de la famille. So you would add de in between so you would invert it from English to French. So you'd say Sally instead of Sally's TV, you would say the TV of Sally, or the chair of Mark, the couch of Paul, the store of the family. And similarly, you can use à to express possession. So la télévision, c'est à elle. La table, c'est à la famille. Le lit, c'est à Marc et Jean. So that would be equivalent to saying the TV, it's hers. The table, it's the family's. So those are just different ways to express possession in French. Au revoir et à demain.
Bonjour, mes amis. Unfortunately, we've arrived at the end of the course. I hope you've enjoyed yourself so far. I hope you've learned a lot of French, more so than you had already learned at the beginning of the course. And I hope that you're able to take a lot from this course and be able to learn even further in the future, especially when it comes to French. I would ask that if you have any questions, comments, concerns, please let me know before you finish the course so that I can address those. As well, if you wouldn't mind, please give me a rating, hopefully a good rating, so that we can encourage more learners to take this course and other courses like these. So thank you for allowing me to guide you on this journey to learning French. And as I said, I hope you learned a lot. Merci et au revoir.
Bonjour à tous. Merci pour votre participation à ce cours. Thanks for your participation in this course. I hope that you have enjoyed what you've learned so far. The purpose of this final video is to provide you with some suggestions to continue to learn French and to apply your language skills beyond our course. Here are 7 things you can do to continue learning French. Number 1, use Duolingo to keep learning new words. If you haven't already signed up for Duolingo, Duolingo is a free platform to learn new languages. Duolingo is specifically designed to help you learn vocabulary, but you will also learn some grammar along the way as well. It is completely free and organized into short lessons which you can do on the go. You can even learn fictional languages like Klingon. Number 2, check out my YouTube channel for some up-to-date playlists for songs in French. You can also look up your own playlists on YouTube. 2 artists who I frequently listen to are Soprano and Mes Aïeux. Check them out on Spotify, Apple Music, or YouTube. Number 3, another thing you can do to keep learning is to register for another one of my courses. Since you're already one of my students and part of my language learning community, you're eligible for a discount. Just use my coupon code on the screen. I also offer lots of different courses if you're interested in studying another language. This coupon code is only good until the end of the month, so be sure to use it before time runs out. Number 4, you can also connect with me on YouTube. I have lots of free videos on YouTube about French, Italian, Spanish, and languages in general. You'll really find my channel interesting if you love to learn about other languages. I am always posting new videos answering common questions about grammar, including why does French have weird numbers for 70, 80, and 90, or why does English have such weird spelling rules? Number 5, another great idea to put your language skills to the test are to start a journal as a way to practice. You can write in it daily about what happened to you that day, or you can write short stories and write your notes as a summary in the journal. Number 6, purchase a workbook to keep practicing. There are lots of workbooks available on Amazon to practice learning a language. Many of them are pretty reasonably priced, and it is a good opportunity for you to work your way through grammar drills to get more comfortable with the grammar. Number 7, check out my website for some free grammar lessons and different blog posts about culture, history, and travel. So that's it for this course. I'm glad we've had the chance to get to know each other, and I look forward to staying connected with you as you continue to learn French. Any of the links I have mentioned in this final lecture are available in the supplemental resources section of this video. Au revoir!